Okay, we all here? I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Wendy, would you call the roll, please?
Paul Banks.
Here.
Pam Howard.
Here.
Lori Visder-Ward.
Here.
Barbara Cruz. Here. Dave Levy.
Here.
Mark Sutter.
Here.
Jeff Swanty.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff, if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Pam, if you would read the mission statement, please.
The Thompson School District will be a school district that empowers, challenges, and inspires students, faculty, staff, parents, school leaders, and community members to learn, achieve, and excel.
Thank you. Item 2.1 is adoption of the agenda for March 7th, 2018. Are there any changes? Well, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
And it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Any changes? And I don't need to make any changes, correct, Wendy? Okay.
Correct.
Would you call the roll, please?
Paul Banks.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visder-Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Sutter.
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda is unanimously adopted. Item 3.1, approval of the regular meeting minutes from the meeting of February 21st as printed. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from the February 21st meeting. Is there any discussion or are there any corrections? Hearing none, Wendy, if you would call the roll, please.
Paul Banks.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visder-Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Sutter.
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Thank you. And those minutes are unanimously approved. Public comment is item 4.1. Wendy, is there anyone signed up for public comment? Okay. And we move on to the action items. Action item 5.1 is the approval of the water share bid purchase. And board, you'll remember we discussed this in session a couple of meetings ago, and I understand who is going to bring this to us? Skip? Or Margaret? Okay. Margaret? Yeah. Okay. Dr. Crespo will present that. My understanding is we were awarded the bid. Is that correct?
We were. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board. Dr. Scheer. So first, I just want to say Skip is really very ill, and I want to honor the fact that he did a lot of the work around this, as well as Brett, who's sitting back there. We couldn't do it without their work, so just want to take a second to say thank you to them, and that I am absolutely pinch hitting. So on February 7th, in executive session, the board authorized staff to engage in negotiations through a sealed bid process to purchase up to 75 shares of Colorado Big Thompson Water from Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. So through their hard work, we have been successful in acquiring 50 shares at a total price of $1,505,000. Upon completion of some further due diligence by Northern Colorado Water District, the district's final price will be about $2,500 above the sale price to cover transfer fees and year's assessment. So the exciting part for us is that we, in comparison to where the amount of water is going, we actually are way ahead. So we got it for a little bit less than where the market is right now.
Excellent. Any questions? And you're looking for approval then on this tonight, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Questions before I call for a motion? Great. I will entertain a motion to approve the water bid purchase in the amount of $1,505,000, 50 shares.
So moved.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to purchase the water shares through the bid purchase at $1,505,050 shares. Any further discussion? Wendy, if you'd call the roll, please.
Paul Banks.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visder-Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Sutter.
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
All right, and that passes unanimously. Thank you. And just as a point of information, I know we've discussed this before, but just sort of for the public to know that the purchase of water shares has to come out of a fund called PILO, which is payment in lieu of
Correct.
land, basically, that we obtain from
And
developers, when developer fees. And it can't be used for purchases other than land or water. So that's where this money comes from. No, it does not come out of the general fund. All right. Item 5.2 is the school utilization policy FC and school closure policy FCA. And is that you also, Dr. Crespo? Okay.
Good evening again. I'm here to answer any questions related to the request to approve the board policy with its additions.
Questions, board, before I call for motion? Jeff?
I have a question. I want to make sure I understood this piece of it. And that has to do with decisions being made to close a school. So if we would wait until we got our October count, so let's say that we thought we wanted to close a school, we got an October count, we would then, October of 2018, we would then wait till January of 2019, and then it would take another 2 years beyond that.
No.
Okay.
Great question. So the way the model works right now, we'll use this year, 2018. So we would look at the capacity that we had just now in 2017, October 1. The same time that we come in and talk about those preliminary enrollment numbers that we share with the board in January, we would say this school is on this cycle, this 2-year window. So at that point in January, which would be a year but really a month, right? So the following year but really a month later, that school would start on the timeline. And within 18 months, that school would close. So at the remainder of that year, we'd already start communicating with families that that school is on the timeline. And then those decisions, as we go through the following year, come back with those November numbers, October 1. And then schools would already be notified ahead of time that we were on the time clock and moving forward. In January, we would come with that information to say, yes, they're still behind, they're still under capacity, they have met all these requirements, and now we're at the point where we're making a decision around closure, so that it's a 2-year cycle, and that they would close for that following year, so that we could spend that spring doing all of those connections with families and making sure that they're ready to start in a different building.
I asked you to use months and years.
Sure.
So let's just pretend we get our 2018 October count for school X.
Right, so school X in October count is under. In January of 19, they would be put on a clock. In November of 18, off the October count, it would be reported that they are still below, and we would make the move to close, making that announcement January 20.
We'd make the announcement January of 19.
No, January 20.
Yes, 19,
Okay, make the announcement January 19. Then when would the school actually close?
August of 19.
August 19. So I guess that's what throws me off. It says the 2-year closure timeline will begin the day after the first board meeting in January.
Because it's the 2-year it's the 2-year school year. So for us, the closure starts that January at the half. We're already monitoring those numbers. We typically would not have a school, we don't have a school that we don't know already is on that underutilization. The reason why we ask for a 2-year is in talking to MPC, families, community, the longer that you drag that on beyond the 2 years, it impacts transition years and it typically impacts sibling years. So by keeping it at that 18-month, 24-month process, it's less of an impact on families. And they can plan more appropriately within an appropriate window for planning that they need. What schools do they want to go to? What does that look like? And doesn't continue to impact enrollment.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
I had a couple questions. So first, can you help me understand the square footage that we determine our usage at, and if they get an A or B or C?
So the square footage is going to be dependent on how the building was built on capacity. So in some cases and in some of our buildings, our capacity is 320 based on the square footage of the building at that time that it was built, and then the evaluation that we did in 2014 around building utilization capacity. It's not getting smaller, it's actually getting bigger over time, the space that students need for that square footage. And then from that number, we continue to monitor what that looks like for growth. And then that's just one of the categories around square footage for the capacity of that building. And we have a capacity map right now hanging upstairs that gives you what those numbers are based on the current utilization. And what we do know is that our buildings that are older that have kind of, and I'll use Loveland High because it's over capacity. Some of those smaller internal classrooms, it feels like there should be more capacity, but you can only fit so many 200-pound kids into those spaces. And that formula is looked at every 10 years, I would say. So we're coming up now, 8 to 10 years, because it was 14 and then prior to that. And there's, I don't know the formula off the top of my head. I can certainly run to Skip's office and go get it, but it's based on where the school was built, like how the school was built, for what ages the school was built, and then what that square footage looks like in a classroom.
So it is determined by the district, and it could fluctuate over time, like technology or personalized, whatever else could affect
It could,
our-
and it has. And in some buildings, I'll use Ivy as an example, right now where they are limited in space, they're essentially over capacity because they're using spaces that we traditionally as a district have determined are not really capacity for classrooms. Now, in early childhood, those capacities are specific around the grants that we apply for. So even within a building, there's a difference around what EC will license versus what we do as a school.
So, just a clarification before I go to Mark on what Paul just said. So it's not as simple as taking the square footage and dividing it by some number and saying that's how many kids?
Correct.
Okay. And then Paul. I'm sorry, Mark.
We got mixed up this morning too, so
I
that's
know,
all
I
right.
know.
What's the status of, in the workbook, appendixes A and C?
When you ask that question, what exactly do you mean? Is it because they're drafts, they're blank?
Yeah.
Okay, so, thank you. So because by the time I get there, I can answer the question. So if you notice any of the pages that are blank, those are based on to be determined. So if we would make a decision around facilities planning, so I'm looking at B right now, that's the closure appendix, but the reality is that the policy FC would be imprinted there, like we would put that policy language directly in there, and then FCA, the school closure evaluation. Those are just connections to the policy so that we would fill that in specific for a building, because it's a template, not just a handbook. Does that make sense? It's okay if it doesn't.
If you could elaborate a little bit more,
Sure.
I'd appreciate it.
So let's use C as an example, because that might be a little bit more clear when I explain it. So Appendix C is the budget impact on a school closure. So what we would do is, working with Gordon, lift that budget Excel spreadsheet, essentially, of how we know what those impacts on closures would be, the cost savings, the expenditures, and put it onto this piece of paper, so that it would be the template specific to that school closure. So then this not only becomes a workbook that we're working through all the time, but if we had a specific building A is going to close, we would then use this as the handbook specific to that building and fill in all the blanks that you see specific to building A. So it's a usable format. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
Great.
So basically, yeah, you're plugging things in
Yes.
based on which school is involved for that particular
Correct.
instance. And so the budget for Appendix C makes sense. Where would the template be found for Appendix A?
So great question. So the timeline, if you scroll all the way up, well, actually just 2 pages, you can see that there's a calendar there, like a timeline that says year 1, year 2, year 3. So what we have done is, within that year 1, there is a full timeline around every single month, and then a task that would be assigned, and then what that project proposal. So if you look at the very top, just under the header that says student cumulative records, you can see where it says develop a plan to transfer students, blah, 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 right? Then there's a calendar there that says year 1, year 2, year 3, and then all of the months. And then it tells you, I can't see, evaluation, planning and preparation and implementation. Do you see that? Can I come over there?
Can you throw a page number out? Because I can't.
every page. Right here.
That one right there?
Yep.
Okay.
So that calendar
Oh, okay.
translates, that's the
It's not
big
really-
calendar.
okay,
That calendar that you see on the top of every single page, that's the big calendar. If you scroll down to Appendix A, the instantaneous school closure timeline, then takes that information and puts it into that framework that will tell you, to Mr. Swanee's point, in January, these are the 17,000 things you have to do. And it's dependent on certain buildings. In February, March, April. So what would happen in here is that the timeline would come into play based on the process. Because if you're closing school A, it may be different than closing school B. You may have, I'll use an example, like you may be closing the building, but you're utilizing it for something else right away. So the calendar would change because you need to be cleaning out at the same time as you're putting in for utilization. If you're mothballing it for a while, then that timeline looks different. So every timeline for every possibility of a building would look a little bit different. So we would plug that in there.
Okay. Is there a description that we have that explains how that timeline then would get compressed and accelerated? And I mean, the word that strikes me in Appendix A is instantaneous. So it feels like, I mean, we're talking about a very, very rapid timeline traversal here.
Right. So an example for an instantaneous would be something like if we had a flood and we could no longer use that building, or we had an event. So in this specific example around the instantaneous, rather than plugging in that closure timeline over 2 years, it would be the building is either being evacuated permanently right now because of unforeseen circumstance, a storm, a closure, a fire, or whatever, and then we would put this timeline into place. So one of the benefits of doing this handbook is that it impacts multiple different approaches to if something were to happen. It becomes the standard and the model that we use in any event, because there will be another chapter on overcapacity and another chapter on boundaries, so that you're just picking this up and plug and play the whole time. I missed the instantaneous, so I'm sorry.
Oh.
I need my glasses checked.
Is that,
I really can't read it.
Yeah,
that
yeah, that
answer?
helps a lot,
I
understanding.
don't know,
the-
maybe instantaneous isn't the word. Maybe you want to use emergency. I mean, you guys are writing this.
So it's
you have a
significant to
reason,
the
I suppose.
EOP. I'm not pushing
Okay.
back, but the language is all aligned across
Okay.
the district.
Okay. Jeff?
I guess I have a couple more questions, and I apologize. I wish I'd looked at this a little closer 2 weeks ago and asked some more questions. But when we talk about changing the wording, I guess that's one of the things that concerns me, is this somewhat becomes the law for the district, the policy. And I'm just going to quote, if I could, from CASB's manual that they give board members. And it says, "School board policies have the force of the law in the school district." So we're creating something fairly rigid here, and that's what concerns me. We're taking away our flexibility somewhat to make decisions and use our judgment at times. And I guess the next question I have too has to do with facilities capacity analysis, and it goes into elementary schools. And ideally, it says we're looking for 550 students. Right now, our largest school is Berthoud with 463. So we're making a marked change here from going from neighborhood schools to bigger, more cost-effective schools. I'm guessing is the reason here, and correct me where I'm wrong, but it does concern me.
Right.
Because, again, that's quite a few over what we already have in our largest schools right now. We have some very good schools. For instance, I'm going to use Big T. That ballpark figure has about 260 students. It's a great school that just got great recognition. I'm concerned about how all of our schools are going to fit in with policies, and it seems like we're going to be fighting policy a lot in the future instead of using our judgment.
So if I may just clarify a little bit. So to begin with, the handbook is not board approved. The handbook is simply just and you've all received it, it's just support to say what that plan would look like, so that whether you approve this document or not, you're confident in the fact that there's been thought and processing through this without being lockstep. Because there is going to be flexibility based on 30 schools, which is why we have an appendix that has so many drafts on it, because it is very specific to the building. In terms of your question related to the capacity number of 500 around elementary schools, you're absolutely correct. We have buildings where the capacity is actually only 320. We couldn't possibly look at that 500. What we tried to do was go to the top level. Every building has its own capacity. What we tried to do was say, in the future, in an elementary school, what could be the most capacity that we would want to have in a neighborhood school? 500. Because that helps us build the capacity within what we have in our larger schools like Coyote and Ponderosa, and still honor capacity that we have at the 320s and the 400s. The reality for us was that threshold number to say that's where we value, but all of our buildings have different capacity numbers. The number is not getting to 500. The number is within the number of kids you can put in that building, are you at the 25% threshold? Within the policy, let's say that you are below that amount. You're underutilized. It doesn't matter if you have 320 kids or 500 kids. We're honoring what the numbers are right now, like Big T. What we're trying to do is assist the board, because what we found is we have this policy exists right now. We have a school utilization range. We report on it on a regular basis. What we don't have is a system in place to say, this school has been below for 10 years, 5 years, 3 years. There's not a mechanism in place right now to say, now what? And this, by having this conversation and saying the now what is we're starting a clock, at least we're having that conversation. And a lot of the feedback came from communities saying, okay, if you're going to start a clock, then we need 2 years, because that provides, first, the understanding of what we're doing. So when we talk about some of the buildings that we've talked in the past, the number one feedback piece that we've heard is, it's too long. We need to know yes or no. And by doing a 2-year, then there's a yes or a no. The board still has the choice. It's just allowing that conversation to occur in a time instead of letting it go and just using the utilization. So we're certainly not limiting board availability to make a decision. And I certainly don't want anybody believing that we would limit a 500, that you'd have to have 500. Our buildings don't have that capacity right now. We use that number as a threshold to say we value having schools that are no bigger than. That isn't to say we won't in the future, but right now.
And also, again, to piggyback off of what Jeff said, that last sentence in FCA where it says, if the initial evaluation finds that closing the school is feasible, so that to me is, that's where the board then can say, okay, we've done the worksheet, it's not feasible, or it is feasible.
Correct.
So that's where it
Gives more
we still have
flexibility.
the policy, right? There's still some flexibility. I'm going to go to Paul first, and then, but that still leaves some flexibility for the boards on the same.
Yeah, on the
Okay.
same thing. And I hear what you're saying, but above it says for optimum instructional delivery and program accommodation, the standard facility size expressed in total student enrollment shall be elementary school 550 students. And that
Can I ask
language,
just
I
where you
guess,
are?
concerns me. Yeah, under
the
facilities
worksheet.
capacity analysis,
Page 3.
page 3 of
It's,
30.
yeah, it's kind of confusing since none of our elementary schools really are in that range.
Okay, so I'm confused on where we're looking. Are we looking on the FCA board policy or on the
No,
handbook?
in the handbook.
Thank you.
And it's actually page 3, halfway down the page, almost at the bottom of the page.
It just doesn't align with our district. And maybe that's more of a general statement of nationally, this is this is a target, area, or
I think
target
just
number.
maybe some wording changes
Change,
around there.
yeah.
Well, that's my concern. We've been using the terminology policy, even though we're now saying this isn't policy, it's a handbook. And we have used that word policy, and I'm just concerned this is more of a boilerplate right here. And I feel like as a board, we need to be having more conversations, that we need to look at this a little bit more careful before we make a decision on it.
So let me just impress again. This handbook is not board approval. This handbook is a guideline so that you can see what the example is around the policy that we're asking for approval for, which is the utilization red line FCA. This handbook, if you want to change that language, that's absolutely fine. I'm sharing what we decided based on the largest capacity that we have right now, specifically for an elementary school. So it's our guiding process right now. It's not a boilerplate. We went through this and looked at what are our standards, how does it align, how do we provide that utilization. And we know that for optimum utilization, you want a little bit larger because you need the capacity for kids, for professional development, for engagement, for all of those things. So that's why we picked that 550 number. If that's not a comfortable number, that's fine. I don't.
I speak for me, it's not a comfortable number for me.
Right.
Because it suggests we're getting away from neighborhood schools, first of all.
And I don't think, so I will say that the value coming from the community is that they value neighborhood schools. So that is not the case at all. If that's the impression that it gives, we certainly would change that language. That doesn't diminish the conversation around the board policy that we're asking for approval. I'm not asking for approval on the handbook. The handbook can be changed. What I'm asking for approval is the board policy to even have the handbook conversation. And as I said, there's a draft all over this, and we're continuing. I just don't want you to think that we haven't gone through this with a fine-tooth comb, because we have, and we've had a team of people doing this. And from the best research that we have, this is the language that fits what we need as a district for a handbook to be able to do a school closure. That isn't the board approval piece. The board approval, I can't even get to this until I have the board approval around FCA, which is that red line policy and the changes to FC, whatever is the other one.
FC and FCA.
Right. So once we get that approval, then we can have a conversation whenever you want, but then we would be having the conversation through MPC around the specificity of, the board feels that 500 is not, whoever feels that the number's not enough. We need smaller, we need bigger, we want to honor neighborhood schools, we want to honor that language. We certainly can put that in there. But I want to be clear that this is just an example. We provided the example, and we've shared the handbook with you as we've gone through the drafts, so that you understand that we have a plan, we have a process, and we have vetted this, so that when you approve FCA, if you approve the policy, it's not out there in the wind. Like, we have a process.
If I may, as an example, the 500, 550, those are all fairly arbitrary. They have really nothing to do with defining a neighborhood school. We have several different neighborhood school models in this school district. Right now, the capacity for Monroe is over 500. That's a neighborhood school. Thompson, Big T is 265 or 270, something like that. That's a neighborhood school. So what we're saying is these examples, especially on the rules side, is just a template for us to work from. It doesn't change our definitions about our schools. Our schools, quite frankly, what defines our neighborhood school is not numbers. And I guess I can argue that just because of the fact that we have so many different capacities out there right now. And Monroe is probably the best example I can think of, and right behind it would be Winona. So I don't want us to, I certainly don't want the board to think that somehow there's some ulterior motive here with this template. It's designed to look at it from the point of view, if that was the standard, what would you do? And if it's something else, you can plug that in. But it's not mandatory that that number be used to analyze each building, because it's all about efficiency and utilization of the building to start with, wherever they are. And this handbook is designed to give us a template to lay over all this so that we can examine it from that point of view. But there certainly was never any intent to philosophically or policy-wise redefine the size of a neighborhood school, because we have so many different sizes.
Well, and looking at it, you brought up, I think, Jeff, one of the Berthoud schools is at 475, give or take. My guess, and I'm kind of spitballing here, but my guess is that were there enough space in there to put 550 kids as that neighborhood grows up? My guess is that neighborhood or that area would support that, rather than saying, well, build us another school somewhere else, that they would want to continue to be part of that school as that neighborhood's growing. So, yeah, it's somewhat of an arbitrary number, but I don't, we can, I think.
It's really
we can work
based on our
around that.
current largest capacity at an elementary school.
And we have Paul next,
So I
and then Mark.
think some of my questions might be partly answered, but if I'm understanding Jeff right, I do appreciate his concern, because the policy that we're being asked to approve is saying that if we are going down this path of closing schools, that we will follow this handbook. So I want to make sure the handbook is what we want it to say before we approve a policy. It says we will do this. So my concern was, if I'm understanding it correctly, and if I am, then I want to hear from other board members, is in the handbook it says that, so if a school is at level U, the clock starts, and the only way to get off that timeline and avoid closure is if they reach level A or B. So so am I understand that correctly?
Board approval.
Okay, let's elaborate on that.
Right, so it's all subject to board approval. So we would come back with those final numbers, we'd look at the program analysis, as Lori mentioned, like, here's the list of the rubric, here's how we make that decision, here's what our recommendation is, the board makes the approval. We don't, it's still a board approval.
So it all goes back to the final sentence, right? If the initial evaluation finds that closing the school is feasible, then the procedures and timelines and FCAR will be followed, right? So it all goes back to if the initial evaluation.
So maybe it's just a few tweaks, but so I could see a situation where it gets on the clock, we get down the path, it doesn't reach level A or B. Now, according to the handbook, it says, well, if it doesn't reach level A or B, we're going to close.
I didn't say we're going to close. It says that we'll evaluate.
We'll continue.
Well, it says the
the steps.
evaluation will begin. Doesn't it say an evaluation for closure
So-
must be initiated?
So I'm reading, if the identified school is unable to reach service level A or B, closure procedures will remain in effect and the identified school will be closed at the end of the school year.
Oh, okay, I'm reading something different. Okay.
Which one are you reading off of?
I'm on page 1 of the handbook. Nope, sorry, page 3 of the handbook.
So, okay.
So maybe it's just a wording thing. That concerns me that there's so many reasons why we may close a school or not close a school. I would hate for it to say, once it's on the clock, if only because of enrollment doesn't reach A or B, that we're saying we will close. I mean,
Can I just offer something, just as a thought? Let's make believe that right now, the handbook is not on the table for even reading. Because I can't change the handbook until I have a policy. So I will do whatever you want me to do around the handbook. I just need you to approve
Right.
the policy.
So-
And I hear and we'll make the changes that need to be made so that we're validating all of the things that are coming up, and we can
So-
do a separate conversation around that. I just want to honor the fact that I can't do any of it until I have a policy.
so maybe I'm learning the procedure. So is it normal to approve a policy that references a regulation via this handbook that doesn't exist yet that we don't know
Typically,
about?
the board wouldn't even see the regulation.
This isn't even a regulation.
No, it's a handbook. Typically, what we tried, so I'll go back a little bit. If you remember 2 board meetings ago, we talked about this process and this board policy. At the last, and we forwarded a draft of this handbook, saying that it was a draft, which is why it still says draft. At the second meeting, it was requested to come back again because you wanted a little more time to read the handbook just to get an idea of where we were going. We added the handbook to this conversation because you've already had this copy. At the end of the day, a regulation typically comes to the board, but not for approval, with your feedback, but it's not an approval. What we're asking for is, because you asked for it, we put the handbook on the document.
So we could see it.
So you could look at it, so you could see where we're headed. But typically, you would only approve the board policies, and then we would come back and share, not for approval, here's what the handbook looks like, and solicit feedback. Hey, we don't like this language, can you fix this? Because it really is just a handbook, it's not policy. It's just the guiding principles for us to do the work. Does that make sense? Like, you don't see the handbooks for lots of things, right? A lot of regulations.
I guess I'm still at the same place. We're being asked to approve a policy that says FCAR will be followed. And without knowing not knowing what that is and exactly what the language is, I'm struggling with that.
Mark, and then,
So understanding that what we're talking about directly, we're focusing on the handbook, but in general, the action item we're talking about is modifying board policy, specifically FC and FCA. My question is in regard to a timeline. I mean, do we have any sort of deadlines or motivation to stick to a specific timeline? How much flexibility do we have here in the event that we feel like we need to deliberate more on this?
So the board, do you mean tonight for this board policy? You have as long as you want. You're the board. If you tell us to come back next week, we come back in 2 weeks. For the policy, specifically around the language around the policy, it's still the board decision. So even if we came back and said, here are the systems that we have in place. We've evaluated all the buildings. They're on a 2-year cycle. They've been under capacity for 10 years. And we come with all that information and we give you our recommendation. And the board says no, the board says no. If the board says no, you're going to wait a year, the board says no, we wait a year. The purpose for this policy is to be able to have that closure discussion in a streamlined way that does not negatively impact our kids and our staff and our community, because essentially what we're doing without having this policy is holding that carrot all the time, a little bit ahead, without a process. What we are asking for is to begin a process so that we can go down the path and continue to keep the board updated, but engage our community so that they know what's happening.
Right. So I guess my question is, the primary external motivator that I can see here is our budget, right? We're trying to be more efficient. We're trying to rein in our expenses and get that budget to align. Do we have any other external motivators besides the budget that's driving this discussion forward?
Yes. There's a lot of conversation around closing a school. How do we get there? What does that mean? How does it impact families? How does it impact the community? We're impacting kids' education because we're keeping them, frankly, in a limbo for year after year after year, and families are frustrated. If we can have this, by having this policy, we're having the conversation in a structured way that allows for parents to be the most informed about what's best for their kids' education. We're timelining a discussion. And we're able to move with real numbers, data and facts around whether or not it's the best option to close a building. Not just because of efficiency of budget, but efficiency of program, efficiency of professional development, efficiency of the number of students. When you drop to a certain number, you have nowhere else to put those kids. So Johnny doesn't get along, this is like at base level. Johnny doesn't get along in his class. Well, there's only 12 kids. You have nowhere else to put him or her, right? So even at the very base level of why we're in this business, we're impacting kids negatively. Then all the way up to exactly your point, budget. So through this whole process, without moving forward with this, we're negatively impacting all levels of the organization because we don't have a timeline, we don't have a process, we don't have utilization numbers that we can say, because of program we wouldn't close, but because of program we might close, because of numbers, or we have growth. I'll use one of our buildings right now tomorrow could explode. But we don't have a timeline, so we don't know what that means. So there's lots of examples, but yes, both budget and others.
Okay. Yeah, but I see your point, right? There's a sense of urgency about structure, understanding how the process works, and being able to understand the direction that the district is moving in regard to school utilization. One of the things that the board decided is that we would not close any schools for the following school year. And so, yeah, I guess my question is if we were to defer this decision so that we can deliberate on it further, for another 2 or 4 weeks, how much of an impact would that have?
Huge, for lots of reasons. So the first reason I would say is that you have a master plan committee that is working tirelessly right now, often meeting 2 times a month and offline, to try to come up with a plan to meet the charges that were provided by the board. The reality is that this is one of those examples where in order to move forward, by providing this closure, they have the opportunity to say, okay, we know that on a 2-year window, here are the things that are going to happen based on this closure. That impacts, let's say, boundaries. That impacts new schools. That impacts growth. And it allows us to long-range plan in a way that is efficient and effective in a growing district, and still honor the fact that we have small schools, small communities, and we want to retain and attract teachers. So any one of the board goals that are out there are impacted because this is a domino. Anything that we do is a domino effect. None of these decisions are isolation. So MPC is working diligently on going out to the community, connecting with surveys, looking at what they value. Do you value small schools? Do you want big schools? Do you like the fact that your roof is caving in? It's not caving in. I'm just using that as an example. We want air conditioning. And all of that is part of a bigger picture. So every time we change that, we diminish the operations of the master plan committee. And basically, there's 60 community members that spend their time doing this work, come up with suggestions and solutions and options, and when we don't move forward with them, we're diminishing the value of the organization. I know that's a super lofty answer, but that's actually the fact. Like, every time we say no, we don't value people that are working with us.
And I'm going to go down here to Dave.
Dr. Crespo, I think you made a very good point there. Of course, I'm the board rep on the MPC. I congratulate you, and by the way, Skip last Monday made a wonderful presentation. He knocked the ball out of the ballpark. I have a suggestion for the board. I do think there are a couple of conflicts in here, a couple of languages that make me uncomfortable. You have to appreciate that. I would suggest, this is an idea for the board. What if we tentatively approve this? It's not officially approved, but direct staff to consider it approved. This year, we're going to get from the MPC their recommendations of what to do with the growth that we have, with or without a new bond. In addition, if I remember correctly, the board is going to decide this year whether or not we're going to close any schools the following, in not next year, but the following year. I think we would learn how this all policy and handbook apply by tentatively approving it, but it's not official policy, but use it as official policy. Bring back all this, as the situations, those issues are presented to the board. We use this as a template. We redline it to see what works and doesn't work. And then by the end of the year, we can finalize this. But it will not delay you in any way. At least in my opinion, it won't delay you in any way. So my suggestion is just what I just said. We direct staff to proceed as if this is approved, but then we redline it, et cetera, as we see the examples come before us, and we act accordingly.
And just a question to clarify what you're saying. You're talking about using the workbook.
And
Is
the
it
the workbook, we don't approve the policy, because I even have a question on the policy, but I'm just not too sure of the language, really. And we just direct staff to say, hey, everything here looks good, but we just don't want to have a policy approved and have to change it later on. Work as if this is policy. Bring us all your issues, your suggestions to how to resolve our issues based that this is policy, and we learn some lessons from it.
And then Jeff.
Is that a motion, or?
Well, it's open for discussion, but I would like to make an emotion, but
I'm not
think not
opposed to it. I like the consideration of being able to look at it a little further. And Dr. Crespo, I apologize to you, but the more I looked at this, the more questions that came up in my mind. And I do have concerns. I would like to see us put off voting on it myself, and maybe Dave's idea will work. And I don't want that in any way to suggest we're diminishing anything you and your staff have done. We certainly appreciate all the hard work that's been put into it. I just have more questions. And again, anytime we're using the word policy, I just see that we're going to do something that we're all going to have to live with in the future. Once policy's made, that's policy. And so
Shall we
me
change it?
personally, I need more time to consider this.
So, Lori, if we're going to put this off, as was suggested, can we make sure this is on our study session that's coming up then, so it can be resolved? I feel like just if we took the handbook off the table, I would be comfortable with where we are with it. But obviously, some of my
So
board members
what
aren't.
you're saying, if we took the handbook off the table and considered the handbook in a study session?
Yeah,
and
or
we
just-
went
yes.
forward with the policy? You're comfortable? I'm just trying to get a feel
I
for
am.
where we are here.
Yeah, and I guess I heard what Dave said, of not wanting to come back and change I guess I'm fine with the policy the way it is, to allow everybody to move forward, knowing that if it's not panning out how we want, we bring it back.
Right.
Then we make the
Policies can be
adjustment.
changed at
Policies can be changed if it doesn't
anytime
work out.
anytime we want to. There's no, I mean,
Right.
any meeting, we could
Right.
literally call a special meeting to change a policy.
Just to make one more.
Oh,
quick-
okay,
it's
go
kind
ahead.
of
And then
a,
Mark.
it's kind of a side note, just my own personal things too, because I know a lot of times we say that if things come to the board and for some reason we have issues with them, we say no, that we're somehow not valuing the work. And I just want, at least in my opinion, that if it's the expectation that everything comes to the board, that we just have to say yes and we're not honoring, we're kind of a rubber stamp board, I don't think we're doing our job. We're just another layer that's looking at it. Sometimes we're not going to have any issues. Sometimes we will. And that's our job, but it does not in any way mean that we don't honor the work of what's going on. So I don't want to be rubber stamp board and just people to hear that we're doing our job. It's not that we don't honor the work being done.
Mark?
And maybe after Mark.
Okay, Mark and then Dr. Scheer.
Yeah, so just focusing on the policies, SC and SCA, I do have some issues, and concerns about some of the wording. But again, looking at what Dave has proposed, I think that's something that we could probably work through along that model. I do like what Barb recommended, which is focusing on this, if we could have a presentation of this in a work session and as a board, be able to discuss this further and research it a little more.
The workbook. Or the whole
Both,
thing.
both FCA, FC, and the workbook, but I think that there'd be a lot of value in that. And as Paul said, I like the idea of being very deliberate. This is a serious issue. This is something that the community is very interested in. And as a board, I think it's important that we're exploring it thoroughly and we really do understand what we're passing.
Dr. Scheer?
Just a comment. I'm not sure the board realizes and I think it's important to point this out, so that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. This policy that you're working on right now is really quite unique in the whole country. There are not that many school districts out there that have put in place policy in this area. And as I remember Paul saying to me, what's the plan? We had a conversation about whether we're going to close schools next year or not, and I thought it was a great question. Where's the plan? We were working on that. This work in progress is something that I think certainly needs to be thoroughly debated and deliberated, because what you're seeing here is somewhat unique in board policy across the country. And it's probably more important now for this school district to seriously consider this than ever, because I can tell you on the street that it's been said to me more times than I have fingers and toes, when are you guys going to finally deal with the issue of efficiency of schools and number of schools and all that kind of stuff? When I first came here, Steve Town said to me, you're going to have to wrestle with this whole issue of efficiency. And quite honestly, through the debate, through the conversation, through the challenges, some of the stuff that's said from you as board members, it was a great opportunity for us to have an aha moment of what was missing. And what was missing was a policy that really addressed this very emotional issue in an objective way. You now have in front of you, and I'm not saying it's in perfect form, and I think it's great that you continue to deliberate and work on it and all that kind of thing. But you have a policy that's unique. In fact, I'm already getting calls from other places saying, we don't have anything like this at all. So my hat's off to the board for having that conversation, but I'm also wanting to compliment Dr. Crespo and the staff that have been working on this diligently for the last 2 months. This is not a boilerplate policy. This is a lot of personal involvement in talking about this from a lot of different points of view, knowing full well the seriousness of what this is all about. But inevitably, this school district is going to have some kind of a plan through an important policy statement, a deliberate kind of thing, to go forward to be able to make decent decisions. And all of this is designed to be a tool to get that done.
So I have a procedure question. Is it possible for us to consider, we haven't really talked about FC, which is the school utilization ranges, which is not a new policy at all. It's an existing policy with some changes. So that's the one. So is it possible for us to consider them separately? Or, of course it is, because we can do what we want. So would you, board, be interested in considering them separately? And then possibly, with FCA, keeping the workbook aside, are there changes we could make from here tonight, if it's just a few little bit of language, that we then could move forward with it? Is that?
Because it's a pretty short
I mean,
policy.
right, and I know these things go through legal, and legal approves these, but if it's something similar like, if it's something simple like that very last line where it says, timelines listed in policy FCAR will be followed, if there was, I think, if that was something less than will be, maybe we could get there. I'm not sure. And I'm just throwing that out as suggestions. Or do we want to pull this off the table tonight, talk about it at March 22nd, I believe, and then bring it back in April?
And remember, we will have the benefit of the MPC giving us their response to the board charge on March 21st. That's still on schedule, is that correct, Dr. Cresswell?
So we'll have the sort of the final report from MPC on March 21st.
We'll have the community report and a preliminary final
So it'll be
for that meeting.
it'll be pretty meaty. Yes? Okay.
Yep, yep.
So I'm open. I mean, I can take a motion to table this item or postpone, I guess, till,
I think,
A later
what
date?
I'd like to do is just make sure that staff understands the board accepts the concept of what they're doing here. What Dr. Shear said, I wholeheartedly agree with. We should have a policy, and it should be a clear procedure, and staff is under the development of doing that and presented to us what they think is ready to go on policy. I'm just not ready to accept it yet, but I don't want any misunderstanding that we don't want a policy and that it's just wordsmithing in my mind that needs to be done.
Can I just ask a clarification? I just want to make sure I understand. The issue is with the policy, not with the regulation. The regulation has its own set of issues, but there's language around the policy that you'd like to change.
sounds like.
It's when I read the policy and then I read the workbook, they're not lined up. And I don't want to approve a policy and then say, well, we'll just change the workbook to make it work with the policy, and then the workbook lets me believe I really didn't like the policy.
So can I just clarify, I'm going to give it a shot. It's still a draft on the handbook. If you accept the policy, so let me be really honest.
Yeah, sure, please.
If we don't approve the policy, changing the language in the handbook is going to take time and energy and effort. When there's the possibility that I'm going to do all of that, and the team is
Still
going to
wanna
do all
approve
of
the
that, and you're
policy.
still going to say no, please, if you just give us a decision on the evaluation closure of FCA, I'll come back with the handbook, we can do a study session, and you can provide all of the feedback and data you want. But it's going to take a lot of manpower to get the handbook where you want it to be. If you're not interested in the closure evaluation policy, then let's not go down that path. That's all I'm asking.
And I,
Okay, hold on. Oh, go ahead, Barb.
I'm going to make a motion that we approve FC and FCA, is that the right, tonight, and move forward with that for a vote.
second.
So there's a motion and a second on the floor to approve policy FC and policy FCA as presented. And, okay, now, further discussion.
Well, I was just hoping to just have a quick discussion, because it is such a short, pithy little policy. If there are concerns, I think we can get there tonight. And if it's changing will be to shall be, I mean, I'm just throwing that out as an example. If that's a sticking point, let's get that figured out tonight.
You could make it a guideline, will be a guideline.
Right. I feel like we can massage this enough to get to closure, no pun intended, on FC and FCA tonight, and then dig into the, handbook, once we've got these guys done. Because I agree. I mean, these are really critical policies for us. We have to be responsible, and that's our job, is that accountability. And I think this does put us in a better position for making decisions moving forward. It's very, very black and white, and we need that guideline. And so, I would like to hear what the concerns are, since we're in discussion with FCA, what the changes would be.
So, Paul?
So I didn't say, so I'm in agreement. It seems like we can make the approvals tonight, so the district has what they need, so they feel comfortable moving forward. The committees have, at the same time, not preventing us from doing anything that we still think we need to be doing.
Right.
So it's kind of both sides are able to do what they need to do, versus if if we didn't approve them, then it could be causing issues. So, and just real quick, Zach, so Pam, my only concern was, and I'm not as concerned as I was before, but it just says that FCAR will be followed. And I don't even know what I don't even know what that regulation is. So is approving.
FCA-R.
Yes, so
Yeah.
it's just approving a policy that says we will follow something that I hadn't even seen yet. That was my one concern. But I'm less concerned.
Mark?
So looking specifically at FCA, one concern that I have is the use of the word feasible. Definition of the word feasible is to be something that can be accomplished easily, and there's nothing easy about closing a school. My preference would be to replace the word feasible because it definitely sends the wrong message, and this is policy, to warranted
Great.
or prudent.
I mean, for me, it's great. Warranted's great. Whatever word you want to put in there.
Okay. The second wordsmithing would be to add a sentence that makes it very clear that ultimately, even when following policy FCA-R, the ultimate decision to close a school ends up being a vote of the board.
I can type it right on here, but it's a PDF, so Wendy's keeping track.
So
So I could form that as an amendment.
that's what I was just going
Right,
to
we
say.
need an
Can you make
amendment.
an amended motion? Can
The
you
wording.
amend the motion to
Amend the
change
motion
that wording?
I'd like to amend the motion to replace the word feasible with warranted, and to append that school closure would only take place upon a vote by the board.
Great.
Okay, so now I've got an amendment, and
Second that
needs a
amendment.
second.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
And so then is there any further discussion on that amendment, Dave?
Well, I just want to state my position again. I'm going to vote no on the motion or the amended motion. I think we should wait. I just don't see the point of what 2 weeks, what's critical about 2 weeks. And I think when we get, and quite frankly, things said we're going to bring up on agenda items, we don't. We still don't have certain things we said we were going to do back in December. So I'm going to vote no until we get it right, and I don't think it's right.
May I ask for a clarification of that? What did we not get brought up in December?
Well, no, I mean, in December, we said we were going to develop a board policy to support our teachers, have a resolution when we changed that language. That dropped off. We never brought that back up to the,
We had that resolution.
no, we don't.
You read
We
it
did.
at the
We
board
read
meeting?
it at the last board meeting, or
We-
two board
I
meetings ago.
don't, okay. Another one is the,
Didn't you read it?
the policy on starting a committee for review of the audit committee.
You indicated to me, Dave, that you were not ready to bring that forward.
No, I met with Gordon. I brought it to him. He said he was going to look at it. I talked to you about that.
Okay, well, that's
Yeah,
off topic, and that's another
So,
issue. We'll take that
exactly. But I
aside.
just, for that reason, I just want to let you know, I recommend we postpone this for a couple of weeks. I don't see how this is going to change what the committee's going to bring us, what we're going to do about the idea of closing 2 schools. I think we'll learn some lessons. I prefer to, I think it's more prudent. That's the point. I just think it's more prudent. And I appreciate the other side of the argument. I respect it, and I certainly respect everything Dr. Shear, Dr. Crespo, and Skip have done. I just think it's the more prudent course of action, so I just wanted to explain that, why my vote's going to be the way it is.
And Mark?
Yeah, thinking about where we are, I mean, I want to make progress on this. I think we're all in consensus that this is, we're moving in the right direction. The work by Dr. Crespo and the MPC, fabulous work. You guys are doing some amazing stuff here. And this is really giving us a lot to figure out, we're moving in the right direction, but it just feels like this is such a big issue that it deserves that extra 2 weeks of deliberation. And I could see us easily spending at least an hour in a work session reviewing this, having a presentation perhaps from the MPC or Dr. Crespo to really understand this and dig into it in more detail. To me, it feels like we've been moving forward on this on a very condensed timeline, and that extra 2 weeks feels like it would be very, very worthwhile.
Can I ask for clarification? So you're saying we need another hour or weeks for this policy right here, these 4 paragraphs?
Yes.
Or are you referring,
Yes.
are you referring to the handbook?
I have a lot of questions just in the wording and the implications behind
Okay,
this.
so you're not just the handbook, you're.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
All right. So the amendment proposed then is to change the language to remove feasible and put in warranted, and add a statement indicating that the final decision would be made by board vote, some language to that effect. So, Jeff?
I have a question. What are you wanting to do here, Mark? I was under the impression you made the motion, and you just got through saying you don't want to do it.
All right.
So where are we with your motion?
I'll tell you what I'd love to see is I'd love to see the amendment pass so that we approve the wording change, and then fail the motion so that we can actually deliberate in this in a work session and bring this back up in the next meeting.
May I make a suggestion that there'll be more changes possibly made in the work session? So I think make all the changes at that time.
Would it be easier if I withdrew my amendment?
I think so.
Is that okay?
Yes.
I'd actually like to
motion's still
have,
on the
I'd
table.
like to.
The motion's still
well,
on the table, I would agree.
Yeah.
If someone else wants to make the motion
We've got a motion and a second. Can we just, let's just take a vote and vote it up or
on
down?
the original motion.
On the amendment.
On the amendment.
And then we'll go to the other. I would much rather do it that way than put it out, take it back, put it out, take it back.
Whatever
I
you
think
say.
you have, but I think you have a motion on the original, not on the
Amendment.
correct.
We have a motion on the amendment.
No, we haven't
No,
seconded
on
yet.
the original.
I
and then-
seconded Mark's
Oh, you did?
No,
amendment.
Mark made the motion
Okay,
on the
and then Pam
amendment.
I
seconded.
seconded.
Seconded the motion on the
Who's on
amendment.
first?
I reread it. We had some more discussion, and now I'm going to call for a vote on the amendment.
That's why you're board president. You
That
got
is
it right.
correct.
Figure it out.
Okay, Wendy, if you'd call the roll, please.
Paul Banks,
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visda Ward,
Aye.
Barbara Cruz,
Aye.
Dave Levy,
No.
Mark Setter,
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
No.
Okay, so the amendment passes 5-2. And now we will take up the original motion, which is to approve policy FC and FCA. Is there any further discussion on that before we call for, or I call for a vote? Okay, Wendy, if you would call the roll on that. Now, remember, we're voting to approve those 2 policies with that new language.
Amendment.
Paul Banks,
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visda Ward,
Aye.
Barbara Cruz,
Aye.
Dave Levy,
No.
Mark Setter,
No.
Jeff Swanty.
No.
Okay, so that passes 4-3 then. Thank you. And then what we will do, what I heard us say is that we want to look at the workbook on March 22nd. Is that's the date? Yes, on March 22nd.
Study session.
The study session, so that will require probably your attendance, Dr. Crespo, and whoever else you feel, Skip, whoever else you feel is necessary to do that.
Great.
Good? Wendy, and will you make a note that for March 22nd to make sure I get that on the agenda?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think, this is not Margaret's. Item 5.3, the acceptable use policy JS for students and GBEE for staff, and that is Matt Kuhn.
Good evening, members of the board, Madam President, and Dr. Scheer. I presented this last time, so I'm really just here to answer questions, but there is one small change we've made since the last time and this time. During cabinet, we noticed one small tweak, and that's in the staff acceptable use policy under social media. In social media, there's a spot right in the first sentence that was added about making sure that any social media applications went through our approval process, which we now have. It's a new thing. I just released that last week. So last week we released a app approval list. It's a catalog of approved apps that have been vetted through data privacy and other considerations, and there's an approval form on that website as well. So now we're saying if you use a social media app with your students, it has to have gone through that process. So that's a little bit of a difference than what I showed you last time. Everything else is the same.
Questions, board, before I call for a motion on this? No. Okay, then I will entertain a motion to approve those 2 policies, JS and GBEE.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve acceptable use policy JS for students and GBEE for staff. Any further discussion? Wendy, call the roll, please.
Paul Banks,
Aye.
Pam Howard,
Aye.
Lori Vistor Ward,
Aye.
Barbara Cruz,
Approved.
Dave Levy,
Aye.
Mark Sutter,
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Thank you, and that passes unanimously. Thank you, Matt. All right. Let's go to Master Plan Committee 6.1. Discussion, this takes us to discussion items. Master Plan Committee update. Is that you, Dr. Crespo, or do you have, oh, I see Candy?
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Shear, Margaret Crespo, Chief Academic Officer. I have Candy Joshi with me. She is our MPC Chair as well, Co-Chair, Chair. And she has some updates, and then I will come up and pick up what's left.
Hi, I'm Candy Joshi. I'm the chair for Master Plan Committee. In the master plan, we've split into 3 subcommittees. We have maintenance backlog, community outreach, and enrollment impact, which is where they're talking about closure and overutilization. For community outreach, we have been hosting some open space forums. We're doing it at middle schools in hopes of reaching all the feeders of the high school, because people identify with middle schools, hopefully, because they're going to go there or they went there. We had one at the Berthoud feeders at Turner on February 15th. Walt Clark and Bill Reed did a Thompson Valley feeder on February 26th. At Conrad Ball, we did the Mountain View feeders on February 27th. And then the Loveland High feeders will be at Irwin on March 20th. And at all the sessions, more than 40 people have attended each. Everyone's been divided into like 3 groups, and they go to 3 different topic tables: maintenance backlog, community outreach, and enrollment impact. And they get to talk amongst each other and write their ideas on the paper, and we're gathering that feedback. Let's see, an update at the March 5th meeting. We went through the maintenance backlog results, and they looked at that information, and same with community outreach and with enrollment impact, but we have one more session to do. I think that's pretty good. Do you have anything? I'm sure you have stuff to add.
So I'll just share some long-range opportunities. So what we're working on right now is the feedback that we've received from all of the feeder meetings to date. We're hearing very clearly what the values are of each of those communities. They're certainly sharing their gratitude for being able to get together across feeders, so multiple elementary schools and multiple middle schools in one case, with their high school as well, so they can see what that looks like. We've had a number of staff attend, both as parents and as staff. 2 board members, well, a number of board members, but Mr. Levy's there certainly, and Ms. Vista Ward's been there, and Dr. Banks was at one as well. Certainly, you're more than welcome to come. We have a community forum coming up on the 20th, as was mentioned, and then we also will be going back to those feeders again in the next couple of weeks. We've got those dates getting solidified right now in the evenings to share that feedback. One of the cool things is we've been able to bring champions along, so people in each of those feeders have said, I'm interested in more information, and we've built a database of about 120 champions around each of the feeders, and continuing to give them updated information as we go through all of the feeders so that they have some perspective around the areas of education that they're interested in around finance or around impact, what that looks like. Additionally, we put together, thank you to Kristen and the team, putting together a survey so that when we did the first Turner piece, it really gave us a lot of information. So we developed a feedback form to provide categories of value. And we can tell, obviously, and this is kind of, we knew health and safety, or health and safety is number 1 for all of our communities right now as we visited them. That's great. The second piece is that we'll be going out to our community groups as well in the next couple of weeks. We've scheduled 3 dates as of right now. We're working on getting those published. We just did it at 5 o'clock. Getting out to the community to do some community forums for our non-student community, so people that don't have have kids in the district, and those meetings will be in key locations, which I don't want to share until we put it out there. So those meetings are already scheduled. We will get feedback from them as well, and then look for champions at those meetings. And then we are going back to those community forums later on and giving them the information they provided in a more comprehensive way, which will last much longer than our MPC update to the board. But we want to continue that discussion because people have really shared the value. Within those 4 categories, there's been a lot of education. So one of the really exciting things for us in our community outreach, which is the one that I'm working with, we've had a lot of really great ideas. So I just want to say thank you to the community around things that we can do to reach both our parents and non-parent community. And then we've done a lot of education around finance. I just want to say thank you to Gordon for providing all of that information as we've gone through this process. And we're working on some documents that will be going out that look similar in what we put out for Thompson, so that everybody knows, wow, this is information coming from TSD, and it'll be coming from master plan. That's all we've got.
Board questions?
Just didn't catch how many attendees have been at the forums.
So we've averaged 50 to 60.
That's phenomenal. Wow, good job. That's hard to get that many people to attend these things, so. that
They're
shows
very
a-
interested.
Yeah, I
We've
was
had
gonna say,
huge
it shows
interest.
a huge interest, so.
Dave?
I've been giving this a little bit of thought. When the budget was cut back with the negative factor, I wasn't here, but it's my understanding that instead of cutting educational emphasis or spending money on education per se, a concerted decision was made to delay maintenance. You could repair a building, you can't repair a kid's education, so to speak. I think that was absolutely positively the correct decision. When you report back, I would ask the board to consider that we should direct staff that at some point in time, we're going to have to do some maintenance. That number for maintenance is going to grow from what it is now, because we've been delaying, and eventually it's going to catch up with us. I think the number we have, Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, is 770,000.
In capital right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a very low number for the amount of facilities we have. Eventually, that has to come up. So maybe it's Gordon, maybe it's a direction to you from the board that when you project, when you show us your 3-year budget starting in April, that you start showing what number we have to apply for maintenance, and that number would have to come from facilities or master planning or whatever that takes. I'm just thinking I don't want to miss that element of our master planning / budget development. Is that fair, board, that staff make sure they provide us that information?
I have an objection. I don't know that there's money there to do that, though. That's the,
Well, here's the point. I
you're
mean,
just looking for like, what number would we need to plug in there?
right.
In a
right.
perfect world?
Well,
kind of
not
thing?
in a perfect world. And if you say you've basically eliminated maintenance, $775,000 for the amount of square footage we have.
Mm-hmm. Right, is one emergency and you're done, right?
Right. So does staff think that we are going to just have to increase that number? Because going back to the overall scenario, if you look at it, we have $3 million we have to cut. There might be $1 million extra we have to put into para. We don't know that yet, but it's a good possibility. That makes $4 million. Is the number now increased even higher because we have to do some more maintenance? And all of that needs to be evaluated. So I'm just thinking, I would like to see that, and it might be, hey, for the next 3 years, we don't think, we think we might have to, we could still live with it, or not. I just think we should get that best thinking from staff.
So I might be able to provide some perspective, and certainly Gordon can speak to the budget conversation, but, so just for some perspective for those at home and the board, we have those scorecards which have those priority levels by school, and in order to make that impact at that priority 1 level, exactly what you're talking around, that maintenance backlog is about $74 million.
Yes, but we're not going to spend $74 million next year or the year after.
But, so I just want to, you're right, and we come every year with that amount, and it's priority 1. So all of our highest priority impacts are $74 million. And those are on the frameworks on the website, on the.
No, agreed. So, go
Well,
ahead.
I think I can help. At the open forum that I was at, I participated as a parent in my feeder system. And I noticed the worksheet that we had was what within those areas of high need, what do you value the most? And so is there a way to more specific, like, yes, there's ones, but are there ones that are like ones with stars? Are there ones that are health and safety issues versus comfort issues versus if we don't do this, it's going to cost us more down the road? Is there a way to more, like, are some of those more pressing ones?
With all due respect, those are ones. And I'm not pushing back, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, that's all, they're all
So I guess
priority.
what I'm saying is hypothetically, this pays out and the board says this is something we think is important, and we come back with the recommendation to the budget that we want to put $2 million into cap reserve next year. What would you spend that extra $125,000? I think that's what we're asking.
Well, what I'm asking is that we cannot get away with only spending $750,000 a year.
Or whatever.
Indefinitely. We cannot get away with that. So at some point in time, that number is going to go up. If it goes up, there's only one source of money, robbing Peter to pay Paul. So it's not, in my mind, it's not what is your desire, it is what is the next thing to break, so to speak, and what that's going to cost us. So we might have to say we're anticipating $2 million a year starting now. Otherwise, we're just going to be spending $2 million and we're just not being realistic in our perception, in our evaluations. That's what
I think Gordon's going to.
commented on.
Just a quick comment. I think you have to be careful not to get involved in isolating deferred maintenance versus this or that. The general fund budget has, I don't know, thousands of object codes, and it has thousands of issues that have to be evaluated in terms of the total package. And that's how we look at things. That's how we build the budget. I would admit to you that deferred maintenance is certainly an interesting and a difficult issue. We tend to build the budget around deferred maintenance in terms of what's our worst emergencies that might happen, and that's how we build it. But I would suggest to you that as you look at this and as we study it, in total budget planning, $140 million, which, by the way, is basically $14 million short every year because of a thing called the budget stabilization factor. We have to wrestle with that. And we wrestle with that every year. But it's not that all of a sudden one thing's more important than another. It's all of that packaged together to try to come up with something for you as a board to look at that is our best thinking about how we create priorities around all of that, not just one thing, but several things. And we've tried to take some things off the board. For instance, last year we had a real problem with bus transportation. We were having our buses that were supposed to be our backup buses were falling apart. So we came up with a solution by doing what we did with a lease program and things like that. But I would suggest to you that I wouldn't get too far into one thing being focused on. It will be, I'll guarantee you, but we have to look at all the issues, including the issue that you all brought up, and I think it's an important one. What are we going to do to keep staff? It's going to be a big issue in terms of because you have all these conflicting almost priorities, and so you have to decide what that's going to be. One of the big issues for us through negotiations will be what do we want to do in terms of honoring the salary schedule, steps, possibly some other kinds of incentives, not to mention the fact that our special ed program is growing in terms of expense, along with some other areas like that. And so when we look at the budget, we will look at that, certainly. We will come back to you with recommendations in terms of our best thinking about what we can live with under those circumstances. And knowing full well what all those issues are. Staff have done a great job of identifying all of that stuff. And so if nothing else changes, and all we have is the revenue from the state for next year, then we will be building a budget with all those different things pushing on us to come to you as a board to say, from our point of view, these are our priorities, and we'd like you to consider this. And then we'll run it out 3 years like you've asked us to do, because we can certainly do some of that. And of course, I would suggest that the second, third year, it gets a little fuzzier because we're not sure what the state's going to do in terms of total revenue. But I will guarantee you that we will get this taken care of in terms of priorities around all areas, not just one area.
Gordon?
Madam President, Dr. Scheer, members of the board, I'm Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district. I would echo what Dr. Scheer has just said. It's tough to prioritize all the things that we need. The $750,000 or $775,000 that's allocated for facility maintenance within the district, while there are some key priorities that are in there, we have no way of knowing what's going to break next year. We have no way of knowing what's going to break tomorrow. I wish I had a crystal ball. I wish facilities had a crystal ball to be able to identify those things. There are some indications that facilities knows when they're looking at a boiler, perhaps the age of the boiler or an HVAC unit or a parking lot or whatever it is, that we can target that $750,000 or $775,000 to, but there is a pool of that money that's available. When it breaks, we fix it, and that's the position we're in right now. So that's the approach that's taken with that component of the budget. If we put more money in there, certainly we can do that. If that's a priority of the board, we will do that and make adequate reductions or propose adequate reductions elsewhere.
Questions?
Well, this one's for Dr. Crespo. And I think I probably heard this before, but I'm a little slow. I need to hear it several times. So I appreciate all the work with the community and the MPC. Applaud that. I want to continue on that. So what is the final product that will come to the board from all this, and when would we receive that?
So the products that will come to the board will be the values related specifically to each of the feeders. What do each of the organizations, right, each of the feeder systems value around their buildings and their neighborhood? As an example, in one of the areas, we know that air conditioning was a huge conversation, something that they value very, very much. But they didn't realize the connection to roof. You can't put a new air conditioning in because you have a roof that isn't where it needs to be. So what we've done is try to educate through that process so that they understand what they're really asking for. Then we would prioritize that list very similar to what we did around the scorecards, back to the priority conversation, in a way that engages what are our needs as well as what does the community want, which would be over in terms of what their values are, which would be one of our overall considerations when bringing a package together around what are the decisions that the board needs to make related to MPC. The other piece is that, as we've talked to MPC, there are 50 members on and off that have a really deep understanding of all of the workings of the district around finance and capacity and deferred maintenance. But because they have that level of expertise, in order to get more information from the community, who are the people that they are representing on MPC, they felt like it was important to go out to the community and hear, what are your interests around community outreach? How do we get to you? How do we connect? So what we're hoping is that through all of those meetings, we get some information that's useful for us as a district as well as for the board around what's the threshold, let's say at Turner, around moving 5th grade up. That was a no-go, nice, loud, and clear. They're not interested in moving their 5th graders up to Turner. But before, we thought that was a great idea. So what we've been able to do is go out and get that information, so when we present a package to the board, it's not about just what MPC has thought, it's really what is the community value, and we can bring that to you.
When tentative timeline?
Well,
when do you
apparently
think?
March 20-something,
21st.
whatever that
Our
date
next
is.
meeting is March 21st.
We'll be here. At this point. So March 21st, and then we may have to follow up with an April 1st, because my last community meeting is March 20th for the feeders, and it really just depends on how much I can tax the staff, which is not much right now, like, obviously.
Thank you.
So we'll have something, yes. Welcome.
And I guess, I'm sorry, was
Go
there
ahead.
somebody
No, go
else?
ahead.
No, sorry. No, and I guess, like, I just keep going back to, I guess what Dr. Scheer said is, we have so many educational issues that, as a board member, I may not be willing to ramp up deferred maintenance at the cost of not updating our textbooks and our curriculum or giving our teachers a pay raise. And, you know, and I did sit through the budget. I was on the budget proposal team back during the recession, and we slashed and burned. I mean, central admin, we hacked, and, you know, professional development gone. Like literally, like we took professional development and we tossed it out the window. So that is kind of like that recurring nightmare to me of all the things that we cut from the district back then that I've been hoping to prioritize. And so, you know, I guess as a board member currently, I may not be ready to start pumping up, $2 or $3 million for deferred maintenance, because I really want to focus on class size or teacher salaries. So I guess I'm just, going back to that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm understood. I'm not advocating spending any more money on maintenance
Okay.
at the expense of education than we have to. What I'm suggesting is that since we are deferring maintenance over and over again, at some point in time, that $750,000 we're allocating is not going to hold up. The dam will
Sure.
bust at some point in
Right,
time.
like the deferred curriculum that we haven't replaced.
Well, yeah, no, all
the dam's gonna burst,
all
yeah.
valuable
Yeah,
things.
right.
And one thought
They all
I
have to
did
be on the
have
table.
is that we do have our reserve, the board created reserve. And we might want to consider that is what we will use for holding abeyance. And if we get we get away with deferring maintenance, we get away with it, but we have that reserve. So there's always that thought. I just want to make sure we all understand that the dam will break at some point.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm not hearing you're trying to prioritize one thing
No.
or other, but you're just trying to make sure that we have as much and complete information as we need, so we can put this whole puzzle
If
together.
facilities
So-
thinks $750,000 is not going to cut it anymore, please let them tell us that.
Yep.
That's what I want, them to come back and tell us.
I think it doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah, just like, teacher salaries doesn't cut it anymore. So we're behind in everything, literally. Every line item of the budget.
All right, I'm going to give us, if we're set with master plan for now? Yes, okay, I'm going to give us like a 7-minute break. Come back at 7:35, please.
5 minutes into it.
Well, I know, but you can see, I know, right?
7 minutes. Any more caffeine, Paul? How can you drink caffeine this late? It doesn't bother you?
Just getting started.
All right, are we all here?
We're all together now.
Staff, everybody's just a little, it is. I don't take ownership.
Okay. Are we all back? Next up is item 6.2, JIC Insurance Renewal Recommendation. JIC standing for Joint Insurance Committee, and that is Dr. Siebers and Company.
Madam President, School Board, Dr. Scherer, Bill Siebers, Chief Human Resources Officer of this amazing district. At this time, I'd like to turn over to Dorothy Barnhart, who is our Benefits and Risk Manager.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Scheer, Dorothy Barnhart, our Benefits and Risk Manager. I am joined tonight by JIC members Karen Schett and Dale Bryant, as well as our Insurance Benefit Specialist, Ann Hinkle. We as the JIC are responsible for recommending a comprehensive employee health insurance package that allows employees a choice of plans and is competitive with current market costs. This past December, our insurance packages were put out to bid. We were sent to 5 companies, and of those 5 companies, 1 refused to quote and 4 provided proposals. We also were provided renewal information for our current provider, which is the Colorado Employers Benefits Trust. In our analysis, we had determined that all of the quotes, aside from 1, would have resulted in an increase in premiums to the district and to our employees. Our current benefit plan through CEBT came in at a 2.5% decrease in premiums.
Impressive.
Yeah, it is.
Could you repeat that?
I don't know that we want her to.
My hearing aid.
It is a result of, we've had 5 years of positive claims, averaging around 84%. So, after much discussion and analyzing the data, the JIC voted to recommend that we renew all our current insurance rates, our insurance plans, and continue the district contribution to PPO 5 and the Kaiser plan for the upcoming year. The estimated net effect of the renewal is a annual decrease of $326,025, with an overall estimated annual cost for our health, life, and dental insurance of $12,714,925.
That's pretty amazing. I don't think that ever happens. I mean, Jeff, you're in insurance. I worked in insurance before I retired, and that's pretty amazing. Rates never do that. So keep, like all of us, keep up whatever it is we're doing. That's incredible. Jeff?
Yeah, my personal health insurance went up 40%, and I would guess that probably most people in this room that aren't with CEBT have experienced something similar. We also use CEBT with the Fire Authority, and they're saving us a tremendous amount of money there, along with terrific service. And at the same time, I think it also shows that the employees of the school district are leading healthy lifestyles and not making unnecessary claims, and hats off to the school district and your team for everything you've done with this.
We're blessed to have a health center in our community that our employees can use at no cost to them for preventative care, which also helps keep those utilization rates down, and our staff loves it, so it's a great benefit.
Is that what I see on the corner of 29th and Garfield?
Yes,
When
ma'am.
I drive by? Awesome. I wondered about that, what that was. Paul?
That's a question too. So I applaud that these are always good numbers to see this. And I don't know if you can answer this question or not. So it's on the theory side. So I just know personally, this is kind of our thinking in our household too, is that the way these insurance plans get priced so much, that there's such a financial burden on the family that in reality, it prevents them from seeking the medical stuff they probably should be seeking. Therefore, our utilization rate goes down and we get to save premiums. But how do we balance? I'm sure those are just conversations you have. I just hate to think people are not getting the medical treatment they would probably normally get because of the way it's structured.
The center is definitely helping that, because that is not only available to our employees, but if their dependents are part of the plan, they have access to use that if they are over the age of 2 years old, which their focus is preventative care, getting people off of pre-diabetics into normal limits, high blood pressure into normal ranges, working through wellness and preventative strategies. One of the things we unfortunately had to do a few years ago was we shifted more costs to the employees to try and keep our rates at a bearable cost. And so it's something we as a JIC struggle with, that balance of giving people the benefits they need, but keeping it price competitive both for them and for our organization. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yep. I don't know if it's a question or a rhetorical thing, but
Okay.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Dave?
Thank you. And in your report, you wrote there are 12 catastrophic claims that exceeded $100,000. The cost of these claims in excess of $100,000 is absorbed by the trust and not charged to the district's utilization. Can you explain who funds the trust, where it is, when it will?
So the trust is composed of a variety of public employers throughout the state of Colorado. Over the years, premium is the funding that they gather from us and these other employers. But through the stop-loss coverage that they have selected to purchase, and how they have been structured, they were established in the 1980s, I believe. It has given us some of this protection from those large claims, which helps buy our rates down, if you will.
So does the district help fund that trust today? Is there any money going into that trust?
Our premium cost.
So portion of your premium cost goes to support the trust?
So the way the trust works is we're considered self-insured through the trust, but to our employees, it feels like It's a hybrid of a self-insured model and a fully insured model. We pay into it as if it's fully insured, and then they administer the plans as if it was a self-insured model. So they review the claims and work with the third-party administrators to make sure things meet guidelines and get paid timely.
So when you said, when Gordon, this is a question for you. When you show the health insurance costs for the employees, that includes the amount of money that goes into the trusts?
Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district. Absolutely, that's the number that goes in there. As Dorothy said, it's the premiums that get paid that go in there. Not to steal the thunder from any of these folks, because they do a great job administering our insurance plan, but Thompson School District is the largest member of the trust. CEBT, the trust that our insurance program is under. So we have a large portion. We are the largest portion of that trust. There's a lot of other smaller districts, smaller municipalities, the fire districts, those types of things that are in there. Essentially, it's spreading the risk across that pool of the trust of all the employers in there.
Right, and we spread also the risk with the insurance company because we self-insure the catastrophic claims.
A portion of our premiums, they use that from their admin fee that is part of that's built into the premiums. And please correct me if I speak awry here, but part of our premiums is the management fee of CEBT to manage the trust. A portion of those premiums go to purchase stop-loss insurance. So if the district, as Dorothy said, the district the plan acts as a self-insured and a fully insured model. Self-insured meaning we would manage that as the district, fully insured meaning the insurance company takes all the risk. With the stop-loss insurance that's in place, the first $100,000 of a claim would count against the claims of the district. Anything beyond that is picked up by a third-party carrier from a premium that the trust purchases on behalf of all members in the trust to cover any of those catastrophic claims.
Excuse me, and obviously you think that third-party carrier provides a cheaper rate than if the primary insurance were to handle it all.
I'm not sure I follow the question.
Well, I mean, you're dividing the risk into two different carriers. And the reason why you're doing that is the second carrier provides you, I assume, a lower cost rate for that extra insurance.
Right, because if we have, let's just say within the plan, we have 1,800 people, 2,000 people that are in the plan, and there were 12 catastrophic claims that were over 100,000. Certainly, they price that through their actuarial tables. They price that accordingly to know that insurance companies, contrary to what they would want you to believe, are actually a for-profit business. So they want to make sure that whatever they're charging in premiums, just as CEBT, whatever they're charging in premiums to their members is more than what the claims they're going to pay out.
Well, of course, or else they go out of business. But that's fine. I'll ask the other questions later.
If I could just offer one more comment. So Dorothy mentioned PPO 5. That's the level of plan that we have, meaning there's a certain amount that's out-of-pocket amount or deductible for an individual and out-of-pocket. Just as a frame of reference, there are districts in the plan right now in the area, so it's not geographically dissimilar to what Thompson is, but there are districts in the area that are currently on PPO 9 plan, meaning they've changed their plan design over the years, and this year moving to PPO 9, meaning increasing the deductible, increasing the out-of-pocket amounts. Thompson has been able to hold those through the recommendations of JIC, been able to hold that plan at PPO 5 for the last 5 years, probably at least.
Since I've been that same plan. What is the individual deductible?
On PPO 5, the individual deductible is $2,500, and on the Kaiser, it's $1,500.
And then, so we're saving on our side the $326,000. Does the employee get on, for those who buy spouse or dependent or whatever. Are they getting better rates?
Yes, they will be, as well as up to the $50 deductible PPO plan.
Nice, okay. Paul?
I don't know more, this might be for Gordon or Bill, I'm not sure. So hypothetically, I know we don't have a lot of money, but hypothetically, moving forward with what you guys have come up with is great. But if, as a board, we felt like trying to help our employees out in this area in some other way, how would that look? Is it something that's negotiate? I mean, what are some things that we might be able to consider saying we want to help this healthcare situation for employees? It would look like what? Does that make sense?
As the dark cloud descends on the podium once again, as great of news as 2.5% decrease in health premiums is, the workers' comp premium is projected to go up 30 or 40%. So again, it's a prioritization of any savings in one area that get reallocated to another area.
I guess like I'm saying, so if we're going through maybe negotiations, we say, well, maybe we don't want to add as much on the compensation side, but we want to defer health costs in some other way. Are there ways to do that? Or is, what we have is what we have and we just live with it and there's nothing else we can ever do?
I would defer to Dr. Siebers on that. That really becomes a negotiations issue, I believe. And in the past, to my knowledge, total compensation, including insurance, has not been part of the conversation within negotiations. Not to say that should be or shouldn't be. It just hasn't been within the district, to my knowledge.
I'm just getting real hypothetical too, because like about recruiting and retaining teachers, sometimes healthcare is more important than other forms of compensation. So I'm just curious how that might look.
So typically we talk about salary and we don't talk about benefits as much going into negotiations. So as far as past practice about talking about insurance, that hasn't come up as an interest. But there is that critical question of how do we maintain the current movement of focusing on district salaries and benefits? And that's why we have the and benefits in that question. So that's something that we'll be looking at in the future and start talking about the story and the interest behind it. So if there's interest from the board to look at that, to help, recruit and retain by looking at benefits is something that we can look at.
Mark?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm ecstatic that we're moving in the right direction. That just doesn't happen. I do have a couple of questions. I just want to make sure that I understood the report. On the first page down at the bottom, we talk about background information. We talk about the loss ratio being 91.9% with the breakdown ratio. The break-even ratio is 91%. So there's a couple negatives implicit in there. One thing I wanted to clarify is that sounds like we're 0.9% over the break-even ratio this year. Is that correct?
That is the overall trust, not the specific district. Our specific district, after they made our adjustments, was sitting at 71.4%. So well below that break-even ratio.
Well below that. Okay,
Yep.
great. So as far as the overall trust, though, the trust itself was like 0.9% above, and that was just this year.
That was just this year.
Do you know what kind of variance and tolerance they have and how that's changed over the past 3 to 5 years? Is this considered healthy?
This is considered healthy for the trust. In fact, this is kind of where it has fallen. And at the last board meeting, they weren't too concerned with this number at this time because they aren't feeling that it was a trend.
Good. The second question that I had goes down to the top of page 3. Current and renewal premiums for single coverage. I was looking at the utilization ending 12/31/17 percentage. Could you help me understand those percentages? We got percentages for single coverage like 146.4% under PPO4. So what is that percentage?
So over the claims that were in the last calendar year, the utilization, instead of being at 100%, was over at 100% for all members of that plan, not just the single providers. Historically, PPO4, since it's the higher level of coverage that our employees buy up to, we see that on that plan because it is our employees who have some and their family or dependents that have significant health concerns. And the variance is just due to the plan design and the types of staff that are on that. HRP, for example, is our hospital reimbursement plan, and that utilization is low because that only kicks in for our employees when they are inpatient hospitalized. It's used as a supplement for a health plan that, say, they have through their employers, their spouse's employers' insurance coverage, or a supplemental type plan.
Okay, so we see that 1%, and that's good news for us.
Yes, it helps bring the overall utilization down.
Okay, cool. And so then, just looking at our district's utilization, I believe that was an 84% or so. Have we seen any major fluctuation? Has that remained fairly steady for the last 3 to 5 years?
The past 5 years, we have been fairly steady. We had a few years prior to that where we had some significant claims, and that was when we did evaluate plans and put in the $2,500 deductible to help bring that down, because we did have a year that we finished at around 107.
Overall, I mean, it sounds like we're in a really healthy state here
Yeah, we are.
with the district. Excellent.
Any further questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Good work. Item 6.3, Head Start training. I believe Lam Caro is here to take us through that.
Madam President, Dr. Chair, members of the board, I'm Lam Caro, Early Childhood Administrator. Thanks for having me here this evening to share some information with you about Head Start. So I thought I'd start with just sharing our vision, and that is children and families empowered for a lifetime of learning. And I want to bring that up because we realize that most of our families are entering the educational system for the first time, and so we intend to lay that foundational success for beyond pre-K but through 12th grade. So here's our mission, and that is to provide high-quality, developmentally appropriate education and family-centered services that value respect through collaboration with community and educational resources, and to identify and alleviate barriers. So what does that all mean? Because that's a nice, big mission statement, because I'm fairly certain if I was to ask my staff, they couldn't tell me this statement, but they could tell me what we're working on. So we do focus a lot of our efforts on high quality development and appropriate education. So that means we're not only looking at academics, but we're also looking at physical and social emotional development. We're looking at family-centered services. So tied down to that last bullet point about identifying and reducing barriers, what resources can we provide parents and families to help them succeed and overcome those barriers so their children succeed in pre-K and go into kindergarten ready to learn? So we also value and respect diversity, because we pull from a lot of different groups from around the community. And then finally is that last piece with the collaboration with the community. It's not just our program that does everything, but it's the effort of everybody in the community that can make things happen. So just some background information. The early childhood program is called the Thompson Integrated Early Childhood Program, and that's because we serve students with special needs, the Colorado Preschool Program, Head Start, and tuition. So generally in our classrooms, you'll see students from ages 3 to 5. And when I say 5, that's kiddos who have aged from ages 4 and turned 5 during that time. And then we also evaluate any student that's referred to our program from the age of 0 to 5. So just some additional background. The program began in '65, so we actually have one of our original site in the district was the Madison Early Childhood site, but we've moved on to a different one. So you should know that the eligibility factors for Head Start are only age and income. So again, I talked about the comprehensive services, and an emphasis of Head Start is that family engagement piece. They want parents to get involved early and often. You should know that it was reauthorized in 2007, and then in 2016, for those of you that are on the board last year, the new Performance Head Start standards came out at that time. So here is just a graphic of what our program looks like right now. And so you can see that, as Dr. Scheer pointed out earlier, the identification of students with special needs has gone up, and that's true for our program as well. So right now, it's about 42% of our program is students that have special needs. So in a typical classroom, first of all, you should know that there are 16 students per class. And if we have 8 3-year-olds, that number drops to 15. And that's a child care licensing rule and a Head Start rule. So the makeup of a class can vary depending on the students that are identified in the area. We try and keep the students at the neighborhood schools. So it could look anywhere from 4 to 6 children in Head Start, 4 to 6 in the CPP program, 1 to 5 in tuition, and then 6 students with special needs. And the purpose behind that is to keep the classrooms as balanced, and it looks the same as a regular classroom when they start moving to kindergarten. So comprehensive services. Really, when I talk about comprehensive services, it's educating and supporting students and families. So in the educational piece, we use creative curriculum through our Understanding by Design planners, but we also have a nutrition program, we have a math program, and we have a social emotional program, and all those components form the basis for our program. So child and health safety, we actually spend a lot of time not only thinking about safety in the classroom, but I know that Mr. Swanee was at our PBIS night earlier this year, and we spent a lot of time talking about pedestrian safety. We talk about getting school safely. We have medical and dental people there to help support families so they can access these resources and make contacts. We also have mental health partners, Summit Stone, and currently we work the LEAP committee in Larimer County, and that's providing mental health services to all of the early childhood programs in Poudre, Fort Collins, Windsor, the Larimer area. And finally, we do have a lot of community partnerships. So Kids Pack provides 81 bags to our students. We partner with, again, like I said, with Summit Stone, and House of Neighborly Services and different programs. So the idea is that we have this community now inside the district and outside that can support different students and families when they need it. The next slide is just the providing where you can find this information if you'd like to delve deeper. So I wanted to get into the piece about the Head Start and the Board of Education. So the big piece is that as the board, you are responsible for the Head Start grant. So that includes the legal and fiduciary responsibilities of what Head Start expects. So the other piece is that you share the responsibilities with our policy council, which now is called Family Pie. And I shared that with you last year when it changed from policy council to families partnering in education. And it's because our policy council sounded threatening, and so they moved it to Family Pie. So with the shared governance, some of the things I wanted to highlight is that it's an equal partnership that each committee will consider shared decisions, proposed decisions from the board and to the policy council. And generally, we've not had a disagreement in things, but we've also, on the next page, I'll talk about what happens if we would. So also the responsibilities are just monitoring how we're doing our school readiness goals, sharing data with you, how our operations are going. So it's not just what's happening in the classroom, but we have to monitor nutrition, our nutritional services, did I say transportation? Yeah. And it's a very comprehensive look at our program. And then finally, with our license, we follow licensing and health department regulations too. So licensing visits all of our sites twice a year. The health department visits us at least once, if not twice a year as well. And it's in once each semester. There are one in the fall and one in the spring. And then finally, the last piece is the fiscal and internal controls. So how are we spending the money and how's that being monitored? And do we have the controls necessary to make sure that that funding is being spent the way it's supposed to be? So we follow the OMB from the Office of Management and Budget circular. And I work closely with Gordon's team to make sure that we are following what we're supposed to be doing. And so the last audit was very positive, and we don't expect anything different in the next one. The disagreement piece that I was talking about is that we also have to have a policy about what happens if we ever have a disagreement, which, like I said, it just involves that we have a decision-making process and a timeline to resolve the dispute. And if there's an impasse, what we're going to do is solve that, which is our mediation. And that's why I included the policy bylaws that I sent with the PowerPoint, because that goes over what would happen if we were to get to that point. It also includes in there the grid of what the responsibilities are for the Board of Education and Family Pie. So what are we doing right now? We're revising our school readiness goals, getting ready for the next coming school year. So that's looking at academic, and when I say academic, I mean literacy and math, and then also developmental goals, which include social, emotional, once again, and physical development. And then we're also looking at what drives our decisions is this data that we take from our teaching strategies gold. And the nice thing about that is because kindergarten uses it also, that our hope is that in the future we'll be able to look at how our kids not only are doing this year, but how they're doing next year, and it should provide the same view from kindergarten, for kindergarten teachers to look at how kids did in EC and how they're doing in kindergarten. We're still focused on what we need to do as a program for continuous improvement. So there's a thing called CLASS, which is an observation tool used to measure our program that looks at the interactions between teachers and students. And so it's focused on what the teachers are doing with students. And then, again, we use the data that we get from the health department and licensing to complete our view of our program. And then the last thing, we talked about transitions between other grade levels, and we're taking a good look at EC and Kinder. We do a really good job with students that are on IEPs, and we're looking at making the transition for general ed's typical students in early childhood, making that transition to kindergarten more robust and rigorous. So what venues can we share information with kindergarten teachers of incoming typical students? Our Head Start review, I've been telling you guys this for the last 4 years, so it's actually here. The audit team will be coming on March 26th to 30th to look at our program. So there's a thing called the Focus Area 2, which looks at everything else except the teacher, which is the other part about it, is the class observation. So the way that's going to look is they're going to be here for that full week, and they're going to spend lots of time in classrooms, as well as with visiting different departments from across our district. So you should also know that this would be the fourth year of our 5-year cycle, and the audit is important this year because that will tell us next year if we rewrite the grant or if we compete for the grant. And I'm going for the rewrite. So some things you should know that are coming up. I will be sharing some information about our annual self-assessment that we do in our program every year that looks at all the pieces of our program. I'll update and share our community needs assessment, so what's going on in the community and what do we need to consider in our program. The completed goal data for the 2017-18 school year, and what the grant will look like for 2018 and 19. So I thought I'd end with this fun picture, and this is the whole staff out in front of the admin building at the beginning of the year, and it's just it's a fun picture because it demonstrates the fun we have with our kids every day. So, questions?
I love the picture because I don't think we realize just how many people we have working in early childhood. I mean, even all the years I sat on policy council, that's a really good visual that tells the picture, so thank you.
Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Dave, you had a question?
Yeah, well, first of all, Lamb, as always, you make great presentations, and I personally am very proud of the work you're doing. Very, very good.
Thank you.
Could you go back to the slide that shows the ideal class, somewhat early in the beginning?
Yep.
Yeah. So now, is every person who is eligible for Head Start because of their financial condition, are they admitted to the program, or is there a space constraint?
Nope, that's correct. So as part of Head Start, we have 139 slots for the program, and one of the requirements is that you fill each and every one of those slots.
So you apply for a grant for 139 slots.
Mm-hmm.
So if 150 people apply,
right,
you would have to turn away 11.
Yes.
Okay. Now, with respect to the tuition program,
Mm-hmm.
is therefore some tuition program people are turned away also?
Yep.
Does the tuition program the tuition they pay for their share of the costs?
Pays for most of it.
Most of it?
Yeah.
80%, 50%?
It's 80% about.
Okay.
I could give you the exact
No,
figure.
no,
Yeah.
but that's, so in other words, they're mostly paying their way?
Yeah.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just curious, on the baby and toddler evaluations. I think the community oftentimes doesn't know that the school district does these evaluations, and it's a really important part. I've known a lot of folks who have been greatly helped by those early evaluations. Do you have a number of approximately how many baby, toddler evaluations are done before, because we think we don't serve that age group, but we do
Right.
these.
So it varies from year to year.
Sure.
So right now, we have evaluated 220 students. We have 107 on a list that we're going through right now, so we're working through that. So, but I say it's different every year because it depends on how many are referred to our program yearly. So the number's up this year, but it could be different next year. But if we follow the trend of students going into special needs or needing
Gonna
special needs
continue.
support, I think that number's going to keep going up.
And how is that funded for the evaluations?
It's funded by our district paying for the team to evaluate them.
And yet we're required to do that.
Yeah.
It's not an option.
Right, we
Right.
are mandated.
Right,
So
there's-
is it an unfunded mandate, is I guess what I'm getting at?
Well, I think at the time when it was mandated that it was a,
Some money?
yeah, it was an easier thing to do. I think with the mandate to continue with that, it's just, we have to explore some different options in the future.
Okay.
At one time, there was a discussion this year to take that off the table, but that legislation got removed.
About how long does an evaluation take?
It takes half of a day because they run through several things that they have a child do. And then they get back with the parent within a week or two to go through the final report.
It's multi-steps, I was just kind of
Yeah.
curious how the actual evaluation.
Yeah, I think
about half a day. Okay.
the challenge is just getting him in the timely manner to get the assessment done.
Sure. Well, thank you for all of you guys do in
Yeah,
that, in that
I will
department.
definitely share that with them.
A question for you and possibly Gordon. Of the grant money that we receive in its entirety and the tuition money that we receive, how much additional money, if any, comes out of our general fund or to fund this program? Or does the grant cover everything?
Well, I'm going to answer it, and then I'm going to have Gordon weigh in. So there's some funds that cover two things, and the first one is that there is some funding to support the tuition paying, because it doesn't, like I said, doesn't cover most of it, covers some of it. But the other part is that we are special education funding through the general fund. So we have students that are identified, but the money flows to the general fund to come back to us. So it's not an additional budget item, it just goes through the fund. And I see Gordon coming up because I must be saying something a little bit off, so.
He wants to be that dark shadow
No.
again.
It's a gray cloud now. No, I think what Lamb described there is pretty accurate. I don't have the number top of mind of what the general fund contribution is to that, but keep in mind, not for Head Start, but for the other programs, the CPP program, the early childhood special ed, we get PPR dollars from the state for those programs as well. So while there is funding from the general fund that goes to early childhood, there's a revenue source associated with that as well. Whether that's a positive or a net positive or net negative, I don't have that number top of mind, I'm sorry.
No, of course, that's fine. Thank you.
Paul?
I'm trying to refresh my memory, so correct me if I'm wrong. So we have some obligation to serve kids with special needs.
Yeah, yes.
And it seems like we're not allowed to passively wait for them to come, that we're supposed to be making some effort to actually go out in the community and seek these students out.
Correct.
Can you give me some ideas of some things that we're having to do or needing to do that?
Sure. So we do some of the typical things that we normally do. We advertise, we reach out to people when people tell us things or they contact us. But primarily, we work with doctors and with early intervention in Larimer County who make the referrals back to us. So one of the things that we do yearly is that we visit with all the different medical offices around Loveland to give them this information so that they know that they can come to us for additional testing.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you, Liam.
Thank you.
Item 6.4, mid-year data report. Dr. Crespo? No? Oh. Oh, yeah. Okay. You're getting ready to leave there, huh?
No, I'm leave. Thanks, Lam.
Just trying to escape.
Never. Okay, so good evening, members of the board, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Shear, Margaret Crespo, Chief Academic Officer, and I am very excited to hand the microphone over to Dawn Huckabee to present our middle of the year data report.
Thank you, Madam President, Dr. Shear, members of the board, Dawn Huckabee, Director of Assessment and Accountability, and wanted to take this opportunity to kind of share the report to you in a little bit different way than you've had before. You do have our specific data by school, by grade level, but what I want to share with you in the presentation here is really how does our school, how do our district compare from beginning of year to middle year, but then also there's a couple of slides there about, so where are we in connection to a national comparison. And so first off, we're going to start with looking at our reading data. This is with our iReady assessment. Our students take this primarily grades 1 through 8. You do see some kindergarten students took it. So you see that's a very small number, 88 in this case. But you'll see that across the board, then we typically have a very high percentage of our students take this assessment. What you see in this data table is you'll see two different pieces of information. In the graph part, you are looking at the percentages of students who were at mid-level placement or higher, which means that at the time they took that assessment, they were at grade level or higher already. And so you'll see in the green, that was the fall performance, and in the blue, you see now the winter performance. What you see in the table down below are additional students who are what we call early on level, which means they're at the beginning of the grade level. So for example, what you see in that third grade, you see 41% at the winter in the top. Those students, we have 41% of our third graders are firmly at mid-level of a third grade, or they're functioning at end of third grade or even higher. And then if you look at that down at the bottom there in the chart, you'll see then the third grade, the 32% at the winter performance. We have an additional 32% of our third grade students who are somewhere between beginning of third grade and middle of third grade. So we consider them being, they're in their grade level content, they are not below grade level. So if you really look at those two numbers, if you add that 32% to the 41%, 74% of our third graders are functioning at third grade level or better. Obviously, that 32% aren't quite at midpoint, but they're working towards that. So I just wanted to orient you to that's what you're seeing in that data, is those are two different sets of numbers, and really, really pleased with what we're seeing with our second and third grade. As you're looking at, we're looking at almost 2/3 of our second graders and 3/4 of our third graders are functioning at grade level here at the midpoint. And the other thing I want to make note that whenever we're looking at this data is this is always compared to where we expect students to be at the end of the year. So if we had 100% of our kids meeting right now, that would be fabulous, because then we would be accelerating them to be moving forward to beyond grade level expectations. This next slide gives you an indication of where our students are in moving out of Tier 3. And just to give you a sense of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 would be students who are on level or they're above grade level. Tier 2 means that they're one level below or they're that early group. So they would be the students who at mid-year third grade are really more kind of a beginning year third grader. So those are Tier 2. And our Tier 3 means that they are at least one full grade level below, one or more grade levels below. So what this is showing you from fall to winter, with the gray bar being the fall and the blue bar being the winter, is the decrease in the percentage of our students at each of these grade levels that are at that tier 3, meaning they're more than one grade level below. And so if you note here, we've got a 10% decrease at grade 3 in the percentage of students who are more than one grade level below, and a 9% decrease again in grade 2. So really seeing some very positive trends in data on our reading performance there for those students. And then this last one, oh, yes.
Just like don't lose you. You go back to that slide. So am I correct in understanding? 31%.
One or more grade levels below 6th grade, yes, yes. So this particular slide is the one that I wanted to draw your attention to. This was prepared by the iReady company, and so they took that first chart that you saw, that same data, and you'll see the same percentages across the grade levels, but how do we then compare to others across the nation who also use iReady? And as you'll notice here, with the exception of 1st grade, from 2nd grade through 8th grade, we have a higher percentage of our students who are at that mid-level or higher at this mid-year point than peers across the nation. So it's very encouraging, very exciting, and you see the same trends down with even that early on placement. You see the same. We are typically, our district performance, a percentage of our students at that level is above where we are, where it is at the nation. And again, adding those numbers, you're going to get, you just start to see a gap grow between us and the nation in some of our grade levels. So that's reading data. We see very similar trends with our math. And although the grade levels change a little bit, we're seeing some better performance here at 2nd grade and 5th grade versus 2nd and 3rd grade. And again, adding up the percentages, we're looking at around the 50% for most of our grades if you add both the mid-year or the mid-level and the early on level. One thing that you'll notice here with the change then again of students who are more than one grade level below, if you look at that 3rd grade, a 16% drop is significant. So really making some strides there. While we might not have seen it as far as the percentage that are at that mid-level or higher, we are seeing a significant drop in students who are no longer more than 1 year behind. And then see a little bit more variation here in the mathematics data, but where we are below the national average, we are very close. So we're really hanging very close to what the national comparison would be. So that's our iReady data, and that really, as it encompasses our 1st through 8th grade. And then for our early learners, our kindergarten, we do have an early literacy assessment called FAST. And what you see here is the decrease of, basically you're looking at from beginning to middle of the year, the percentage that were below grade level compared to those that were above grade level. And so those two numbers should add up to 100%. And so we have reduced from the beginning of the year to middle of the year, 31.8% of our students have moved from being below grade level to being at or above grade level. And again, those are factored again on end of year targets. So we expect that number to continue to grow as having those above grade level grow as over the course of the year. And then lastly, we have the which is in reference to what Lam was sharing with Teaching Strategies Gold. And so our kindergarten students do take this assessment, and when I say take it, most of it is observational by the classroom teacher. And this assessment is given during the first 60 calendar days of school. And so what you see here are the percentage of students who were demonstrating grade level expectations at that beginning of the year, and what percentage of them met in one or more domains. And so we did have 4.9% of our students who did not meet any of the 6 domains. And to give you an idea what the 6 domains are, one domain is social emotional, one is physical, one is language, one is cognitive, we have literacy, and we have mathematics. So we have almost 5% of our students who did not demonstrate really that incoming kindergarten readiness in any of the 6, but if you look at the other end, we had almost 41% of our students who did come in ready in all 6 of those. So that's kind of in a nutshell the data to share with you. Again, you have in the rest of the packet, I guess that was the end of the PowerPoint, I'll go back. You have then the specific data for each school, by each grade level. You see the district data, a little bit of information about the purpose for each one of the assessments, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. And it's all on the website. Yes, it is. Thank you.
I have one quick question. Why are on the kindergartners, why are there a few on the iReady, that took the iReady?
There are some students that, based on the FAST data, that will to get another diagnostic, we'll put them on that.
Okay.
Just to kind of gives it another look at it, and then teachers use that data to correlate and triangulate and see if it's comparable to what they're seeing in the classroom.
And these particular assessments, students just take them during the day. They're not. It's not like the TCAP or the opting out and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yes. So we have very high percentages of our students taking these assessments.
Okay. Anybody else?
First of all, wonderful presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But this is a question for the board. We are spending most of our time concerned with the budget for the next couple of years and potential school closings, as we need to. Should we have a work session on studying output of this and say, for instance, correct me if I'm wrong, but on one of your pages you show here, for instance, 31% of 6th grade is tier 3. So a third of our students are not reading at the 6th grade level. My thought is, how could we truly evaluate the budget and all other things we're going to evaluate without truly understanding, is there anything we could do to improve this? So should we have a workshop where we invite staff in to explain this a little more and discuss what options we might have? Isn't that what the Board of Education is really about?
Yeah, and I'm wondering what the timing would be best for that, when you guys would have the best data for that, after an end of the year? I don't
Yes.
know. Yeah, I don't know what your
So
cycle
this
would
is
look like.
mid-year data, and certainly we're hoping to continue to see the growth. So I would say more towards the end of the year would give a better idea about where we are and what that looks like.
But my thought would be, when we evaluate budget, just as we discussed before, do we have the dam bursting on maintenance? Or are we going to worry about that without truly evaluating if our school's performing well? And I would accept any data that you have now as being
Sure.
the best we have, and let's make that evaluation. I think that's something, my thoughts are that's important.
So I think you guys know where I'm at on this, that
That's why I'm looking right at you.
I know that teaching and learning is our number one priority. So in my opinion, it should be part of every meeting that we have. Yes, the study session, but in some way, part of every meeting we have. And I think if you ask Dawn and everybody else, you get high-level data like this, which is great, but hundreds and hundreds of questions that can be generated underneath that about instruction and how teachers are using that data and how you're tracking. And so, yeah, I think as a board, we need to learn how to ask those questions and why we need to ask those questions. And I'd like to see time at every meeting having these kind of conversations.
Barb?
Big piece of what I heard Pam say earlier when she was talking about being on the board earlier and how professional development was totally cut. So there's a big piece that is impacting everything else that's going on in our classrooms as well. That has to be considered.
So I'll take,
I would like, I don't want to make a motion if we.
yeah,
we
no,
don't
no,
need it.
I'll put it on there for, not March, obviously, but, because I think we're pretty full for March, but, April, I guess.
I've got a question follow-up to Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Are we out of line with where we should be in comparison to other districts? I mean, 31% certainly sounds high, but is that an alarming number in comparison to Others?
Oh. And we have it in comparison to national
I
data.
mean,
here.
in comparison to national, you can see where we are. We are a little bit below, but not significantly below where national trends would be at the same point in time in this particular
On
case.
math.
In math, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean,
It's a much happier
reading,
picture
it
in
was-
reading.
Reading, we were above the national average. Or at least, so at sixth grade, we were the same.
Can you compare these district by district within the state, though? Could you compare our scores with?
Not on iReady data.
Because they don't do them.
Correct.
Not everybody does the same
Correct.
tests.
So the only thing we can do comparison-wise would be state assessments. We shared that data with you
Yep.
back in October, I
Yeah.
believe, September, October. So we do have some of that trend data over the last 3 years of having a comparable assessment at the state level. We do have this data in reading going back a number of years, at least for 1 through 5. We don't have as many data points for 6 through 8. And mathematics, we really just have this year, and we piloted a little bit last year. So we don't have those same comparators to be able to do that at this point, but as we continue to move forward, we'll have more and more data points.
So April then? We okay with April?
So, and I know I'm not picking on what you're doing, but in my mindset too, in my opinion, I'd like to get us to a point where
Something every month.
this becomes first. So rather than hearing things like, well, this month is full, we'll get to it, this comes first, and maybe some other things eventually start dropping off. So I know you didn't mean it that way, but
No,
just hoping we can get,
well,
and
I
I'm just
think-
speaking for myself, that it becomes such a high priority that
I think we
We
need
find
to
a way to
get to a
prioritize.
point, I think we need to get to a point where we understand
absolutely.
Yep. The data, what questions we're asking, what we should be looking at, what the trends are, possibly your explanations, your ideas about maybe about why we're seeing some trends, because you can look at some of these and some things are like, whoa, that's a way outlier. So I'm sure you have some ideas of why that's happening. So I think us understanding that stuff is where we need to start, and then we can take a look at however we decide on a month-by-month basis. I mean, obviously, you're not going to look at the same data every month because it's going to be the same data until the test is taken again, but somehow, maybe with input from staff, what's meaningful for us to look at on a monthly basis.
So, sorry.
Oh, no, please.
And celebrations.
To Dr. Banks's point, we have a number of, I don't want to say assessments, but we have a number of ways to bring that information on a regular basis. We have beginning, mid, and end, but we also have some unit assessment pieces that we can provide. We have some high-level pieces that we're collecting all the time. We're able to articulate very specifically for groups of students and students where they are, what that looks like. It's really just a matter of, to your point, bringing it every time so that there's a level of understanding around all of what that looks like. This kind of assessment is very different than some of the other assessments we give. It's not necessarily related to what we're doing around unit assessments for math or what we do around ELA or proficiency guidelines and competency for high school. So that, and middle school. So that takes it's just a longer conversation to make sure that we're bringing you information that is relevant and that we have an opportunity to share what it means and what that looks like.
Well, and I think if we start with a work session, then you can clue us into what's relevant and what we should be looking at and go from there.
Just one more comment. As Dr. Scheer said before, everything he does in the district, or the whole district does, is to say, with the resources we have available, what is the best use of our money? Always, always thinking about how to improve the education performance experience. There's no doubt that's the focal point. I'd like to know from everything, are we achieving a reasonable goal? And that is so difficult for myself personally to understand, because when I see 31% not at the level, I would say my first reaction would be we have a problem. Yet, if you compare it to national averages, we might say, even though it's disappointing, it's certainly all schools trying to do something better, all districts trying to do something better. So I think that conversation needs to be, as everyone else said, just a comprehensive conversation. And I can see Dr. Scheer is wanting to chime in.
If I may. I agree. I think why some of the processes we have in place right now at the building level are the most important. They're the most relevant. We can average data at the district level. We do that very well, and we certainly aggregate it for purposes of looking at it from the district point of view. But our main focus, and I want to give Learning Services a lot of credit for this over this last 5 or 6 years, especially the last 4, through some of the literacy work that we did early on. We carved out $500,000, and the whole idea was, as much as possible, to focus building by building on what was happening there through their SUIPs and getting the schools to take those seriously around goals for the academics. And I think the buildings have done that. And each building principal certainly feels a certain responsibility for that. So that data, and we have a lot of it, is something that they're regularly working on. And I've been in buildings where teachers are having their PLCs, professional learning community meetings, discussing specific students and specific data points for a particular week or a particular month. The culture in this district around that conversation is significantly different than it used to be here a long time ago. And again, it's because of the importance of the very thing you're talking about, and that is, what are we doing for each child in terms of their instructional program, and are we making sure that we're having a regular conversation about that, so that we don't have children falling through the cracks in terms of their performance and overall achievement. It's a huge issue. It's a challenging issue, and it's one that it has all kinds of other issues tied to it in terms of resources and all that goes with that. But I think in terms of process and in terms of what we've done to try to focus on that, I think that we can certainly bring some good data to you building by building in terms of what's happening. Again, that's why we have 2 elementary directors of elementary directors instead of 1 now, so that we can concentrate more of their effort on asking those questions and getting feedback from the principals and the staff in terms of what they're doing, and then bringing the data back to them. That's another thing. Having Dawn in her position, some of that was organized before this, but she's certainly done a good job of helping give the buildings the information that they need when we start the disaggregation process and the data mining and all that goes on. And there's a lot of it going on out there. So it's a rich conversation, one certainly we can have. I think for the board, I think it's going to be important for you to look at the data points, but I also think it's important for all of you to understand the processes.
That's the point I want to emphasize. The numbers are great. It kind of tells us where we're at. But to me, my questions are really going to be, why are we getting that number? And what are answering the question of why, then what is it that the board can do at a budget or policy level to emphasize the things that are working and tell us what's not working and how to deal with that. So to me, it's more the why than the...
So it might be helpful for those board members that are interested. We have a PLC even at the district level talking about data specifically. They occur every Monday. If you're interested in sitting through that PLC process where we're asking those why questions and how we impact kids directly and what are we doing around that, you certainly are more than welcome to sit in through those meetings. The only thing that we would ask, we have a lot of people that come in and out of those meetings, and we want to make sure that we're coordinating the time appropriately for you. So if you're interested, we'll set you up for a Monday. And the meetings typically include our PLT group, which are those individuals that we do have around professional development and data and all of the other groups. And we come together and talk about whatever data's at hand, the DUIP, whatever we're doing around DAC, and asking those why questions. And to Dr. Shear's point, years ago, we dictated as a district what the schools would do around their SUIP based on what those goals were that we felt were important. We changed that model a few years back and really allowed for true dialogue to occur so that the schools could tell us what their needs were. And that all came foundationally from that literacy conversation, so that we were meeting the needs of the buildings, because we know that our buildings are all different. Some buildings have more, some buildings have less need, and how did we allocate that? We've done that as well with some of our Title I funds and our Title II funds, so that we're allowing the buildings to have a greater conversation. And what we're reaping are the benefits of the assessments that we have and the levels that we have. We're seeing those increase over time. I just want to honor the fact that we do have those very exact questions that you can ask us and we can answer. And then great, because we can't answer them, then we'll figure out what's missing and how do we improve that. And then you just have more knowledge about what's happening to make those decisions.
When and where are those meetings?
They are Mondays in room 242. So if you're interested, just shoot me an email, and then Amber will send you, here are the options of times, because we alternate what group comes in, and we want to make sure it's relevant. Like, if it's a date of discussion around enrollment, that's not really what you're talking about. If it's a date of discussion around what we're doing around assessment and what those questions look like, that's more relative. Yes, ma'am.
The power that's out there when you've turned it over to the schools and the conversations that they're having are so obvious when you go out and visit schools, and the principals are so excited to share the impact that it's having with the students. So it's really worthwhile.
It absolutely has been amazing. And in some of our buildings, even the kids know where they are and what they're working on, and that's amazing.
Right up to that board
Yep.
to show you, this
Yep.
is where I am, this
That's
is what I
right.
did.
Yep.
Dr. Crespo graciously extended an invitation to me a couple of years ago. I attended, and I want to say, for the benefit of the public, let me assure you, every single person in that room was devoted to excellence in education. Thank you, Dr. Shear, Dr. Crespo, everybody. I was so impressed. Everybody should know that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, item 6.5, budget development for 2018-19. Gordon Jones.
Madam President, Dr. Shear, members of the board, I'm Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district. Tonight's update on the budget development is going to center around the revenue projections that are being made for next year. A lot of considerations go into analyzing revenue for the district. There's a lot of unknowns out there, primarily at the legislative level. They're still debating quite vigorously, I might add, what the 17-18 supplemental budget to the districts may look like, let alone taking the time to move forward with the 18-19 discussion. So a lot of questions that are out there, and a lot of discussion that will take place at the legislative level yet to come. One of the factors impacting the state is the higher assessed valuations across the state from what they have anticipated previously, meaning the assessed valuations across the state are higher than what the state had planned for. What that means is a larger portion of the School Finance Act funding is coming from the local level. We'll see that on a coming slide here to give a little better representation of that, but there's more money from the School Finance Act that's being generated locally, meaning the state has less money that they have to contribute from a backfill or a state equalization standpoint. Another consideration is a consumer price index, or CPI, roughly associated with inflation. What that number is doing, that is creeping up, so that's going to impact the PPR, the per pupil revenue, the base rate that the state uses in the School Finance Act funding formula. For Thompson School District, the funded pupil count for 18-19 is being proposed to be near the 2017 October count levels. We'll see that a bit more as we go along here too, but just as a frame of reference, for 17-18, we're at about 15,230 students across the district. That excludes early childhood, but includes the charter schools. And proposed for 18-19 is 15,252, which is an increase of 22 funded pupils. We'll see that on a coming slide. The other revenue items that have to be considered are the revenue that's generated from mill levy overrides that are in place in the district right now. There are two that have passed, one in '99 for $7.5 million and one in 2006 for $6.5 million. As we've mentioned in the past, when those were adopted and by the voters in the district and started being collected, there were costs associated with that. And it's called for very specific things that needed to be included in those two mill levy overrides. over the years, inflationary impact on that means that we collect about $14 million, just over $14 million, and the district, with the inflationary impact of the items that were called for specifically in the ballot language in those MLOs, the district now expends $18 or $19 million a year for those items. Just as a reminder, the 99 mil MLO is capped at 8.5 mils and or $7.5 million. We're obviously at the $7.5 million. Currently, that requires 4.142 mils to generate that 7.5 million. On the 2006, it's a maximum of 4.15 mils, and we're currently at 3.612 mils for that to collect the 6,540,000. The other revenue items that we have are fairly minimal when you look at the budget, but those are expected to increase roughly at the rate of inflation. Examples of those items would be reimbursements that come from the state from a transportation perspective, or special education, or the vocational programs, the CTE programs that we have. Just as a reminder to the board, those are funded by the state at about 25 cents on the dollar, 25 cents or a little less on the dollar that is expended. There are the E-rate reimbursements, which is a technology reimbursement program that the district takes part in. Investments, which is essentially taking any excess cash that the district may have based on a timing standpoint and investing that in a conservative money market account, basically. A historical perspective before we get into what's being planned for 18-19. This shows a variety of different factors, but I'll point out a few things here. On line 2, the inflation percentage, you can see that moving around a bit from 1.9 to 2.8 down to 1.2 and up to 2.8 again. There's the estimates in the state are anywhere from 3 to 3.4% that I've heard for the coming year. The enrollment growth percentage is for Thompson School District students, so you can see the changes there. Those at 1.42% and 1.24% in 13-14 and 16-17 are reasonable numbers for the area. As I talk to other districts, some of the similar numbers that they're seeing, but we also have some of those lower years as well. You'll see the base funding on line 4. Just as a quick refresher of the School Finance Act, what that calls for is the state sets that base funding level each year, and then in rows 7 through 10 there are those various factors that are applied. The personnel cost factor, cost of living factor, size factor, all those types of things that are part of the calculation that ultimately get to the per pupil funding amount in row 11, which is what the state constitution calls for Thompson School District specifically, in this case, what the district should be funded at per the state of Colorado's constitution. On row 12, you then see the budget balancing figure. BS is budget stabilization, or negative factor as it was formerly known. You can see the amount of dollars per pupil that is not funded by the state as a budget balancing mechanism to get to the actual amount on row 13 that we have. Rows 16 through 18 on this slide show that percentage that I talked about of a higher and higher amount being funded locally by assessed valuations increasing. So for the 17-18 year, the $40,478,000 and the $3,270,000 for local real estate taxes and local specific ownership taxes, that's the local component. Those two combined make up about 40% of the total, and the state equalization or state backfill is the additional 60%. Keep in mind that those are percentages of row 21, which is after the budget stabilization or negative factor has been taken out. So you can see Thompson's share on row 20 of the underfunding that from what the formula calls for that's taken place over the last 5 years. 22, row 22 shows the statewide total negative factor or budget stabilization factor balance, TSD's portion, and what that change has been from year to year. So a significant change from 13-14 to 14-15, where the negative factor was bought down by 124 million. But that's down to being a buy down of 571,000 that took place in the year that we're in right now. Moving forward, as I said, with a lot of unknowns at the legislative level, we don't know what our PPR number will be for 2018-19 at this point. So that requires making some educated guesses of what that number could look like. So I've provided here 3 possible scenarios. The 10 million, 25 million, and 50 million buy down that you see at the top of each of those columns represents buy down of the negative factor. And again, that's I would consider reasonable assumptions based on the increase in the local property tax that's being generated, meaning the state has to contribute less. So based on each of those scenarios, assuming an inflation factor of 3% that you see on row 2, gets to the base funding amount that you see, applying the factors that we talked about in rows 7 through 10, getting to a per pupil funding amount on row 11, taking out the anticipated negative factor if it were to be bought down by 10 million, 25 million, or 50 million respectively. Shows you what the PPR number highlighted in yellow could be for the district. And I say could be because these, again, are nothing is a definite at this point. Shows again those dollar amounts associated with the local share versus the state share, what the anticipated budget stabilization factor would look like, and showing the on row 24 what that buy down of the negative factor could look like, 10, 25, or 50 million. Again, this is what will be debated quite vigorously at the legislative level over the coming months as the state tries to arrive at a budget that they adopt by May. This slide shows the funded pupil count that is being anticipated for next year. This is based on primarily a starting point of our actual 17-18, which is our October count for 17-18. You can see no anticipated increase for the early childhood or the CPP, Colorado preschool program, programs that some of those that Lamb talked about earlier. The traditional Thompson or the Thompson School District K through 12, we anticipate a 36 funded pupils more than we had last year or this current year. And you can see the numbers for the charters there as well, resulting in a net 22.3 funded pupil increase anticipated at this time. Again, assuming the 3 scenarios of a 10, 25, and $50 million buy down of the negative factor, should the legislators determine that any of those levels are appropriate, shows you the range of what could be available. And there's 2 primary components when we talk about this, about new revenue. This is what we would refer to as new revenue. First, it's the change in the funded pupil count times the total PPR, estimated PPR amount gives us one number. And then the change in the PPR itself on the base of our funded pupil count. So you can see in those scenarios, if the negative factor or budget stabilization factor were to be bought down by $10 million, it would result in an anticipated $4.3 million of new revenue for the district. And you can see the same number in the other 2 scenarios. That new revenue then competes with the inflationary impact that we have from a wage standpoint, from a benefit standpoint, although we've heard earlier about the reduction in health benefits, but that's offset by the non-FTE costs of increase in workers' comp premiums. There's a variety of considerations. Those are just two that I mentioned, but a lot of considerations throughout the entire budget that would impact that. So any steps and columns increase that may be considered, any priorities that are addressed, such as what the board adopted earlier in the year, $153,000 for recruit and retain, safety and security, facilities, the list goes on and on, but those increases or priorities in those programs would be what would be competing for these new revenue dollars that could be available for the district in the 18-19 year. Questions or direction from the board regarding revenue assumptions for 18-19 that the board would like to see built into the budget?
I have just one quick one on your 10, 25, and 50 buy down of the negative factor.
Correct.
How, those are the numbers that they're throwing around down at the legislature?
And a variety of numbers thrown around in the governor's proposed budget that came out in November of 2017 for the 18-19 year. He had a buy down of the negative factor of 70 million built in. Once the actual assessed valuations came in from all of the counties across the state in December, he had a revised budget that was issued at the beginning of January that for 18-19 that suggests a $100 million buy down of the negative factor. That is the governor's proposed budget. That is without any comments from the legislative branch. So the Joint Budget Committee will certainly review that, make their recommendations, take that to the General Assembly, and that's where the debate continues. In my professional opinion, in my short 3 years in the district, in the short or long 3 years, depending on how you look at it, the likelihood of having a $100 million buy down would not be prudent, in my professional opinion. That's why I elected to show 3 scenarios somewhat less than that. That's not to say that won't take place. It could, but I would rather be surprised on the upside than hurt on the downside.
Board, any other questions? All right. Thank you, Gordon. Dr. Siebers, item 6.6, superintendent search update.
Madam President, School Board, Dr. Scheer, Bill Siebers, Chief Human Resources Officer. At this time, I'll give you a handout and go over that.
Which amazing district?
This amazing district.
Even at 9 o'clock.
Which was supposed to be a short.
It's only 8:55. Thank you. These next two will. Okay.
So the first page that you have in your handout is, I'll go over the agenda that's scheduled for March 20th with McPherson and Jacobson coming out and running that in executive session. But before that, there's a form that Mrs. Vista Ward has that's a confidentiality agreement. So on the second page in the packet goes over the confidential agreement, and I would need that signed by you before you leave tonight. So if you have a moment to kind of go through it, I can read some of it, but it just gives you a general idea of things that you agree to before we send you information about the applicants for the superintendent position. So, like I said, Lori has the master copy. The copy that you have in your packet is your copy to have when you leave tonight. Yeah,
the one
Lori
I
has a
passed
copy
it
and she's
down.
passing it around now.
And then after you sign it, send it back up this way, and I'll go the other direction.
Okay, so while you're signing that, I'll just continue the presentation. So March 20th, 2018, we meet in executive session from 4:30 to 8:30 PM, room 132. In that meeting, basically, there's 4 things that will take place: review applicants, interview schedule, interview questions and procedures, and additional questions and information. So some things I just want to give you information on that I had talked to McPherson and Jacobson about. Currently, right now, there's 51 completed applicants. 51. So McPherson and Jacobson will send me on March 16th the names of the individuals that will be presented to the board on March 20th for your consideration, including cover letter, answer to the questions around the criteria, and their resume.
What they're going to present to us is their short list?
Yes. So their short list will be 6 to 8 candidates. So that's an important part to understand too. 6 to 8 is what they'll go in depth with. So on the 20th, McPherson and Jacobson will have completed list of everybody who applied. From that list, McPherson and Jacobson will give a written and verbal overview of those that they think most closely matched the selection criteria by the board. After they have given the overview, you will watch the videos of those candidates. And then once the board selects who you want to interview, they will begin calling and scheduling the interviews. So the other highlight I'll talk briefly about is after March 20th, the finalists need to be announced publicly with each candidate's credentials. And then the highlight, talking to Dick Bump, giving me information around that, which is our legal counsel, is after the finalists are announced, 14 days need to pass before the board can appoint the next superintendent of the Thompson School District. So that announcement, looking at the schedule, that announcement can take place at the board meeting on April 18th. So the reason I say April 18th, it falls into that second board meeting. Instead of having a special meeting, you can present it on the 18th. And all that information will be presented more on the 20th.
Questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can we see all the resumes? If a board member wants to see them all, can we do so?
And having that conversation the 20th.
I would like to have it, I'd like to see them before the 20th. I'd like to see them, if he submits a short list of 6 to 8, we're going to concentrate on that. I'd like to see them all beforehand. I just want to review it.
So you're saying you want to see all 51 resumes?
Well, I want to have access to all 51. Here's a thought. It's just a thought. If you set up a secure website where they're just available, if a board member wants to perusal them, he could do so, or he or she could do so. So I'd like to have that opportunity. I'm not too sure how much I'll do on it, but I'd like to have that opportunity. Anybody feel plus or minus on that, board?
I actually like that idea. I trust them wholeheartedly. That's why we hired them, but it just gets my mind around it, gets me right. Yeah.
Right, so.
I'd like to have access to them. I'm not particular on the time. It can be before or after the 20th. I don't have a care one way or the other. If they can do it for us before that, I don't see why they couldn't really.
Right, if they're going to do it, they might as well do it before. That's why I look at it.
So are you thinking online or?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's possible, if that's
Yeah.
something they can do.
What I've had before is to get
Theological.
into that, you have to have a certain
Get a
password.
passcode to get in,
Yeah.
look at the website or something.
Right.
If that's something they can set up for us, or if there's another way they do that, I don't know. Would it be helpful if?
So basically what they can do is the same thing that we do when we send out information about applicants that apply for positions in our district to the interview committee. We do a PDF file of all the applicants so they can review that information going in.
But is it well, it would just come to each one of us then.
Yeah, it's just creating a PDF
Yeah, but it'd be 51
document and send it.
PDFs instead of,
Well, it'd be
Well,
one
one
PDF
PDF
with 51 applicants. So basically what you do is you check in the computer system of all the applicants you want to see, and then they generate. And that's the work that we do with Apple Track.
Jeff had a question or comment to add.
I guess I'm not opposed to it, but I'm concerned why we're looking at these other applicants, because then there's the probability, or at least the possibility, we're gonna see somebody that we like, and then we're gonna start having conversations on it, we're gonna have more meetings. I'm concerned we're gonna slow this whole process down. And we've hired these people based on their expertise. And I'm just concerned about what we're going to get into if we start second guessing what they've recommended to us.
I don't see it as second guessing so much as we've paid them to do a service for us. This is our job. This is our information. I think we have the prerogative to look at it if we want to.
We certainly do, but we have time restraints.
I would be curious to look at them and see if they come forward, for instance, if they come forward with 8 finalists and they're all from out of state. I would be very curious to know why none of them were from Colorado, for instance. If they came forward with 8 finalists, or 8 semifinalists, I guess we're talking now, and they were all men, I'd be very curious to know why there was no woman in the mix. I think those are valid questions, and those are valid things that we have a right to look at. You don't have to look at them if you don't want to, but if they've got them available, I don't see why we can't look at them.
I definitely don't want to get bogged down, and I know we've hired them and they're professionals, but at the same time, there's no way they have the same level of vested interest in the long term of this outcome. And I just feel like the more prepared I can be going into it, but Jeff's caution's appropriate too. I don't want to end up getting bogged down and having it. We can't allow that to happen, but be prepared.
Would it be
All I can
helpful?
do is ask and see.
And see what they say. I was going to say, would it be helpful if one of us talked to them? Would you prefer that? I mean, I can call
No,
Mr.
I've been talking to
McPherson.
him on
Okay.
several occasions.
Well, that's what I figured, that you're sort of the go-between,
Yeah.
and it makes sense to have you do it.
the only concern I have is a PDF of 3 or 4 page resume times 50. It's 150, 200 pages. If you wanted to go back and look at somebody, that's confusing. So there has to be some sort of index up front and says this person, you just click it and it goes to that resume.
So, one, I really appreciate the feedback. I can't give you an answer until I talk to them.
Sure.
And the only thing I was referring to is the system that we use and how we generate the information to the interview committee. So the thing I would ask is, I'm not going to jump to conclusions yet to
Yeah.
see what system they have and what that looks like as far as what they're going to be sending me on the 16th. And like I said, I'll know more when they send that information to me on the 16th and see what they send, and then to see if that's acceptable to send to the board.
Sure. I mean, just, I'm sure they could do a good job if we ask them to.
Anything else?
So the other thing I would add too is just to let the board know that I talked to Dick Bump, and he will be available for any questions during that time. So we can have legal on a
the
conference
20th?
phone.
On the phone
Yep.
or in
On the
person?
20th?
On the phone.
On the phone. Great.
So we can call them in. Mark had a question, I think, before I let you go.
Just following up with Dave's request, I know that PDF files can be bookmarked. And so just using that term bookmark, can you bookmark each resume? That would be a great request.
Okay, moving on to 6.7 negotiations update, Dr. Sievers. And I believe that's the second part of this folder.
Correct. The last document in your folder is the negotiations update. First, I'd like to thank Lisa Foxworth for all the work that she does, the continual work around keeping us organized in negotiations. So that's the information that was sent out to you. You have a copy for that. So the one thing I highlight, we met last Wednesday, February 28th. And it gives you an idea on the first page of the notes. It's a working product. It gives you who's on the negotiating team for both sides. Purpose So I just want to go over the 4 questions that I had sent out to you all, letting you know what the 4 questions were going in negotiations. So the first 3 are the same. How do we help our staff prioritize their limited time and flexibly meet the needs of our students? Question 2, what changes need to be made in the memorandum of understanding to better serve our district, with bullet points around emergency staffing needs for ESS, online students being successful, teacher collaboration and development, and revision of the licensed employee handbook, negotiation schedule and procedures. Question 3 is, how do we maintain the current movement of focusing on district salaries and benefits? And the one question, number 4, how do we ensure that students and staff have a healthy environment to learn and teach? So that was all on page 1. I'd like to direct the board to page 8. So basically in negotiations, we started off with talking about norms, talking about protocols, and just talking about the general procedures. Then we got into question 1, and question 1 was, how do we help our staff prioritize their limited time to flexibly meet the needs of our students? So key points of discussion, so using the interest-based model, we first start off with story, and there are multiple stories. Consistent collaboration time, we kind of narrowed it down to that. Interest, meet all needs of stakeholders, flexibility. The options that we have, let's evaluate. So we looked at flexibility, each building setting up their own contract time, different ways or different days can be different things for different levels. Everything out of plan time, 20% genius time, something around my goals and effectiveness. Then we had talked about the criteria being affordable, possible, doable, unintended consequences, August meeting, MOU changes, wording versus intent, parameters, past practice. So in our next negotiation meeting, which is tomorrow, I invite all board members to tomorrow, Thursday,
March 8th.
March 8th, starting in the boardroom at 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And during that meeting, we'll start looking at strategy designs and proposals for question 1.
So you're working on one question at a time?
Yes. And learning from, things I went awry last year, really getting to the heart of the question around time and making sure that we have enough time to discuss the time. That is all I have for you tonight.
I just have a question. What does 20% genius time mean?
So 20% genius time is trying to figure out, if that was an option around, late starts, providing 20% genius time for the buildings would give, I think it was modeled from Google. Google has an activity of genius time and having their workers, kind of get together and have not free time, I want to say free time, but productive time where you think outside the box. So we had a discussion of what that could look like. I'm not saying we went into depth conversation about that. That was more of a group activity, bringing that forward of what that small group was talking about. So that can look like, staff members have an opportunity, administration working with staff. That can even look, for students having that genius time as well. So it's just the part of the interest base where we're kind of looking at all different ideas, thinking outside the box and, really having our own genius time during, negotiations of what it could look like for the future of Thompson School District, helping students achieve. So it really, if you think about it, it's really about that personalized learning for staff and students. So we've had rich conversations about that, and I look forward to tomorrow.
Any other questions, board? All right.
So has everybody signed that document?
Yeah, I have it right here. Thank
I
you.
really like the photos. That helps a lot, thanks.
Yeah, they're tiny, though.
Get out your
Could they be
magnifying
bigger
glass.
next time? Okay, that takes us to the, I think it does. Let me turn the
Yeah.
page. That takes us to the end of the agenda. There are no written reports this time. Is that correct? And future agenda items, requests for information, Mark.
Follow up on, we had this on a future agenda item, but follow up on the late start initiative.
Oh, so just like
And
you want to
how the task force is doing
report
and
back
what
on the
they're
task
focusing on.
force.
Yeah.
We go on daylight savings time this weekend.
So when I-
We'll see a downward trend on.
So when I talked in work session about the next steps, asking the board, of where we're at with the stages right now, because we had the overall task force and now we're split up into 5 different groups. So those 5 different groups right now are setting up meetings. For example, I'm on elementary specials and Andy is on elementary specials. So we met today for about an hour and a half. So we're bringing closure to our items that we had, but other teams are in different places, meaning some of them met already and some of them have that scheduled and some have 3 or 4 meetings. So I couldn't go in depth on bringing that forward because of the work that's still going on. I can go over the 5 committees and show you that handout again that I presented to you in the work session. So
Let me ask you
it's,
this.
yeah.
Let me ask you this question. What would be a good board meeting to schedule for a follow-up?
Would you have more on the 21st?
Or
No,
would
because
April be
it's-
No,
better?
because spring break is there and there.
Sure.
And, at the work session, I said by the end of April, I think that first board meeting in April would be a good opportunity to kind of present where the teams are, as far as solving some of the issues that are coming forward and if there needs to be any changes from there. But the feedback that I got from Mr. Swanee was we did add parent members on each one of the committees.
All right, cool.
Wendy, would you make a note for the first meeting of April to make sure that gets picked up on the agenda? Anybody else?
Yes.
Dave?
I'd like to have the staff report back on the recommendation for the audit committee.
It's scheduled for the next meeting.
Is it?
That's correct.
That'd be great.
Stan, did you have something?
Just a clarification, so you know, April 18th, you will not be at this dais. You'll be in Berthoud. So if you make an announcement, do you want to make it at the dais here, or do you want?
April 18th. Oh, for the superintendent thing.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's a good point.
we could rearrange
Can
schedules
we,
for down there.
can we switch? Because I'd hate not to be
I know.
with the,
TV and everything.
yeah.
That's why I'm
Yeah.
bringing
I
it to your
think we should
attention.
switch.
Can we flip and do the first meeting in Berthoud?
We can do that.
Check and see if they have the.
And then be here on
facility.
the 18th? Is that,
If
think
that's where you
that's
want
wise.
us to go, we'll make the announcement and then give.
what do you
I
think?
move.
Liz? I would really,
I'll
I
make
would,
a motion if we
I
need
think
to.
we want to be able to have
Yeah.
the
It
audio
needs to be
visual.
here.
I would think so, and if, with that announcement, you might even be able to have that person here.
So let's see if we can flip that. I don't have any particular objection to any room that they use in the high school. I mean, the library is fine, nice,
Right.
but we can make do in the auditorium.
We can
too, if you
check
turn
their
some lights
schedule.
on.
I think we can accommodate, the board meeting's not our issue, and the communication's not the issue. Just want to make sure you all are comfortable with us making that switch, but I thought maybe you might want to consider that.
Yeah, that's fine. We okay with that, board? Just flip-flopping those 2 meetings?
Make that note and make them.
Is that the 7th, Stan? No. What's the
Uh,
date of the April? 4th?
4th of April, and Michael, if you would pick up on that in terms of an announcement that we're going to flip the schedule so that we can be at the dais here for the announcement.
Anything else? All right. Meeting adjourned.
I get to go home and.